Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to prologue and chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Fire Emblem, the Sacred Stones. I'm very excited to talk about this one with you guys. I'm very excited to get started on this game because it holds a very near and dear place in my heart as a special game in the series for me. This is something that I know I've mentioned in a couple of previous episodes, but I haven't talked about it in any amount of depth. Fire Emblem 8 was my very first Fire Emblem game. This was the game that introduced me to the series. More or less, it was the first game that I played in the series. And if you guys are willing to indulge me for a little bit, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I got into the series, sort of my story of becoming a Fire Emblem fan, because I haven't really had an opportunity to... I've had plenty of opportunities, but I've been intentionally saving it for getting to this game. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that. And before I do, though, I will extend that to you for this episode's question. I want to know how you guys got into the series. Tell me what your first game was. Tell me, any special stories or experiences you remember associated with that game. Whatever you want to share. I think it would be fun to hear how you guys got into the series. I think a lot of you guys are going to say FE8, because I think FE8 was a pretty common starting place for reasons that I'll get into in a little bit. But on my end, I first got into the series. I talked a little bit about hearing about the series for the first time with Melee, Super Smash Bros. Melee, with Marth and Roy, and at some point I had found out that Fire Emblem, at the time that Melee was released, was a Japan-only series, and I was truly devastated, so devastated that I apparently didn't bother looking into it at all, because I'm pretty sure, I don't remember exactly how old I was when I was playing Melee, but I'm pretty sure I was old enough to where FE7 was out, possibly even FE8. So if I had done even a little bit of research or asking around, I probably would have figured out the Fire Emblem was real and that I could play it. And then my story of getting into the series would have been very different, although still maybe actually would have been FE8, but I'm not 100% sure. Regardless, that's not what happened. Instead, I went for several years without having any knowledge of the series, not hearing about it at all. Maybe every once in a while I'd hear about some of the, the Tellius games or whatever. But I Ike was in Brawl, etc., stuff like that. So I knew, I had a general idea of that it was around and all that. But I didn't really start to get interested in it again until Awakening came out. And I remember I was in high school. I want to say I was a sophomore in high school. I was 2013, so I would have been a freshman or sophomore. And I was really interested in Awakening. I remember I watched a whole bunch of trailers about it. I watched YouTubers talk about it and stuff like that, because Awakening was what really, hit the mainstream. So everybody was talking about it. Everybody knew about Awakening. And what I was really specifically excited about was the prospect of being able to pick my promotion when you promote, because it felt very much, it felt akin to Pokemon in a sense. I mean, that was the closest point of comparison that I had at the time, where I could, there weren't that many options compared to Pokemon, obviously, but with the promotion system, being able to pick between different classes to promote into, not to mention reclassing, which I think I also knew about at the time, it really felt like you could have make your army very distinct from somebody else who might be playing through the game, between the different units you're using. But even if you're using the same units, promoting them, promoting Sully into a Paladin or a Great Knight, or reclassing her into a Myrmidon, right? So it felt like I could really experiment and have fun trying out different things, and that my playthrough would be unique to me in a way that a lot of other games couldn't replicate. And I just thought that was super cool. But here was the problem. I would have just bought and played Fire Emblem Awakening. We'd be having a different conversation, because Awakening would have been my first Fire Emblem game. The problem was that I was broke and didn't have a job, because I was 15. And my parents never ever bought me video games. It was their policy. They were the video games rot your brain type of parents, which is not completely unreasonable, I don't think. I certainly think that's a preferable approach over giving your 4-year-old an iPad all day or whatever. So between extremes, right? Like I definitely think that that's the better approach. But it sucked when you're 15 and you really want a game and you really have no way of getting access to it. I could, I got games sometimes on Christmas if I was lucky. And even then I could only ask for like one or two before they were like, no. So I was at a little bit of a crossroads, right? I didn't really know what to do, and I really wanted to play Fire Emblem. So I did a little research. And by research, I'm like 99% sure that what I did was Google how to play video games for free or something like that. But through some method or another, I learned about the wonderful world of emulation, which is a something that I'm still very passionate and enthusiastic about today. I'm a big fan of piracy and emulation as a method of consumer control, being able to say like I don't want to deprive myself of this thing, but I don't respect the circumstances under which it was made, or I don't want to support the company that made it. And people can have opinions on that. If you don't agree that piracy is moral or ethical, whatever, you're entitled to your opinion. But I think it's very good and very important for people to and also just generally, I don't think people's access to art should be restricted financially, at least not like to an unreasonable degree, which is kind of the situation we live in, where like a lot of games are very expensive. Streaming services are getting more and more expensive as time goes on, right? So I definitely am. I'm a big advocate of piracy, and I think that my life would be. This sounds hyperbolic, but I'm really not being hyperbolic at all. My life would be very different, I think, if I didn't discover emulation, and because I would my favorite game of all time, I only played because I knew how to pirate PS1 games. And I only got into Fire Emblem, as we're talking about, because my favorite game series for the past decade of my life. I would never have gotten into it if it wasn't for emulation. I maybe would have played Awakening, and then I don't know, I wouldn't have had a way to go back and play the other games, so I don't even know where my story would have gone from there with Fire Emblem. Maybe I would have stopped playing entirely. Who knows? I really don't know what would have happened. I definitely wouldn't be making this podcast, or I probably wouldn't be making this podcast. I probably wouldn't have a lot of the same friends that I currently do. I might have even like gone to a different college. I might have missed out on a lot of friendships that I have right now, because part of why I wanted to go to the college that I went to is because I wanted to study game design. I didn't end up graduating with a degree in game design. I pivoted to psychology about halfway through. But I went to that college specifically to get a degree in game design because of games like Suikoden 2, which made me really want to explore, what games could do, what effect games could have on people. And if I hadn't gone to that college, I would almost certainly have like none of the friends that I currently do. I would have like a completely different friend group, if it was if that hadn't happened. So like it's a butterfly effect, right? Like emulation, and to a lesser extent, specifically FEA. I don't want to get too far away from that. Completely changed the trajectory of my life. And so I have FE8, Fire Emblem more broadly, but Fire Emblem 8 specifically, to get me to thank for getting me into the series in general, and impacting a lot of the things that have happened to me since then. Yeah, maybe that was a little much, but I really do feel that strongly about my story and my experience with this series. And I've been saying like this series a lot. Fire Emblem 8 isn't a game that I have like. I like it, it's a good game, and I have a lot of fond memories of it, but it's not a game that I would say that I am like super emotionally attached to by any means. It's not my favorite game in the series by a long shot. It sits like right around the middle for me, usually, like whenever I think about like which games I like in the series, like which like my rankings and stuff like that, the order. Fire Emblem 8 tends to end up somewhere around the middle. but I still have a lot of fond memories of it, and I'm still very thankful for the experiences that it allowed me to have. So thank you, Fire Emblem 8. I will promise I'll be nice to you as we move through these chapters, because it's if I remember correctly, there's a few negative things that I'm going to want to say about you, but I'll try to bet my best to contain myself. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, and this kind of segues nicely from what we were just talking about, because as I mentioned, one of the things that I was particularly interested in learning about Fire Emblem for the first time is the different class options that you are given when you promote units in Awakening. And I'm not 100% sure that this is what happened, but I have a pretty good feeling that in my research into what Fire Emblem game I should play. Now that I have my shiny new GBA emulator, I have my choice of 3 different games that I could play. The reason I settled on FE8, I'm pretty sure, is because this is the game that actually introduced split promotion paths. In this game, every single character that can promote, with the exception of like Erica and Ephraim, I guess, the 2 protagonists, every single character is given the option of one class, or 2, one class or the other. You're able to choose between one of 2 different promotion options. There we go. I don't know why that was so difficult for me to find the wording on. One of 2 different promotion options. So knights can promote into cavaliers, knights can promote into generals or great knights. Cavaliers can promote into great knights or paladins. Pegasus knights can turn into falcon knights or falco knights, or wyvern knights. Et cetera, et cetera. There's a few different options. Most of them are pretty consistent with what we would see in later games. There's a few differences. In fact, to this day, some of the differences are they're still making changes to some of the different class options that you have when you promote in these games. And 17 and 16 changed how promotion works in general pretty significantly. So it's a little bit hard to say for sure. If all of them line up with what we saw in Fire Emblem 8. This is an aspect of the game that I really, really liked when I first played through it, and I think it made replaying feel a lot more significant to me, because it felt fun to like go through and pick different classes for different characters. It's a concept that I've lost a little bit of appreciation for over the years, partially as I've gotten more familiar with the series. I've learned more about like different class dynamics and things like that, and it's really hard for me to play this game now and make those class choices with the understanding that almost every single option in this entire game between 2 different classes upon promotion is like horribly unbalanced. There's almost always one very clear superior choice for every single character in the game. And sometimes those options are not like... Sometimes I'm willing to pick the less good option or the worse option if it's a class that I like more, either aesthetically or for gameplay purposes. Sometimes the difference doesn't feel big enough to matter, but in some cases it really, really does. Some of the worst characters some of the characters that get the shortest end of the stick in this regard are the trainee units, which we're going to be talking about. But in particular, the trainee units, I've developed a lot more of a negative opinion on them over time, just because their whole gimmick feels so undermined by how badly balanced the class options are in this game. But we'll talk more about them as we go through. As I talk about all of the characters in this game, I am going to be talking about, if they promote, what are their promotion options, and which do I feel is the superior choice between them. Which is, I think it's my opinions are going to be pretty consistent with what the community at large thinks. I don't think I'm going to have any particularly hot takes. I think the closest you're going to get is like me agreeing that the better option that everyone thinks is the better option is in fact the better option, but I personally, go for the worse option because I think it's more fun, or I don't think the difference is as pronounced as maybe people think, maybe people say it is, or whatever. But I don't think that I'm going to have any big disagreements with the consensus on which promotion options are better for certain characters and things like that. I think it'll be pretty consistent. Okay, just one last thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into the game proper. I did mention earlier that I wanted you guys to let me know what is the game that got you into the series. What was the first game that you started with? What are some stories and experiences that you remember? from getting into the series for the first time. And I did also mention that I think a fair few people, are going to answer with FE8. For those of you who do answer, because FE8 is considered by many to be one of the better starting points in the entire series. And that's for a few different reasons, right? First and foremost, probably the most notorious thing about this game is that it is considered by many to be the easiest Fire Emblem game, by kind of a pretty wide margin. And I think that this is true. I think there's only one game in the series that kind of gives it a run for its money, and that's FE9, the game immediately after this. And even then, that's only in like the localized version where they took out Maniac mode or whatever. And even then, even in those circumstances where we're talking about localized FE9 hard mode, I still think it's pretty significantly harder than this game, because you have some brick walls, like the Black Knight and Ashnard, who are like really, really difficult to take down, depending on your circumstances. So I definitely think that FE8 has earned its reputation as the easiest game in the series, or at least the easiest game in the series that people are generally familiar with. I don't know, maybe people think like FE3 or FE1 is easier, but I don't hear people talk about those games very often, so I wouldn't know. I have no idea, to be honest with you. The other reason that I think this game is a pretty common starting point is that it's considered to be one of the best games to start with if you're looking for an experience similar to the modern games. And I don't really think that this is actually very true anymore, but I think that this was mostly a relic of the Awakening and Fates era, especially Awakening, because you have a lot of people who, like me, were either interested in Awakening, but weren't able to play it, or you just had people who played Awakening or just coming off of Awakening as their first Fire Emblem game, and they asked the question, what should I play next? Where should I go from here? And the answer, a lot of the time, like a huge majority of the time, was always FE8. And that's because FE8 actually has a lot in common with Awakening. Awakening borrowed a lot of concepts and ideas from FE8 that had not been used at all between FE8 and Awakening, which in turn, and we're going to talk a little bit about this as they come up, a few of the different features in FE8, because a lot of those features that were recycled and reused in Awakening were in turn recycled and reused in FE8 from Fire Emblem Gaiden, the second Fire Emblem game, because that game was really out there in a lot of its ideas and did a lot of very unique and interesting things that were mostly pushed to the side in subsequent games. FE8 decided to bring a lot of those ideas back. And I'm talking like some big, very significant concepts. Things like monsters as enemies, which was originally in Gaiden, then not done at all for a while, and then until it was eventually brought back in FE8, and then they ditched that for a while after that and brought it back in Awakening, kind of. Awakening has the Risen, which are like mostly just like regular classes, but they're like kind of monsters. And then they all have like the like blob monster guys who are like actual monsters, so maybe those count, I don't really know. But most notably, for Awakening fans, if you played Awakening, that you probably got used to being able to go across an overworld, a world map, and fight enemies on the overworld for effectively infinite experience and money, and items. And that was an idea that was reused from FE8. FE8 does have a world map. Skirmishes and battles don't open up on the world map until a fair bit into the game. We're not going to get access to them this episode. I think maybe next episode. I don't exactly remember when it is, but it's like relatively soon. So it's not exactly the same as Awakening, because, and even putting that aside, FE8 has the Tower of Volney and the Lagdao Ruins, which FE13 does not really have an equivalent to. So it's not exactly the same by any means. But between the world map grinding and the split promotion options and some of the other aspects of FE8 that it had in common with Awakening, it was a very common answer to the question of, so you just beat Awakening, where should you go next? What game should you play after finishing Awakening for the first time? Or if you have interest in Awakening, but would rather start with an older game or a more accessible game, what should you do? And for that reason, I do think it was a lot of people's first game. And despite that, I don't want to spend too long on this, but it hasn't really gotten as much recognition as a lot of other games in the series. Games like FE7 get a lot of attention because of Lynn. Obviously, Ike and Roy are in Smash Brothers. All that stuff. And then, of course, the modern games don't even bear mentioning. FE8 was always one that was kind of left in the dust. Even in Engage, right, where they used Erica as the emblem ring for that game. Ephraim was in there as the emblem, it was like a dual emblem ring that they both shared. But Erica was the only one that ever had any story presence or any conversations with anybody, which is fine. Erica's great. I like Erica, but I wish that Ephraim was there too. Ephraim is far from the only protagonist to get the short end of the stick. Rip my boy Elliewood, man. For real, they did him so dirty and Engaged. They included both Lynn and Hector, but not the main lord of FE7. It is brutal, man. It's very unfortunate. So Ephraim is not alone in this. Seliph got shafted for sure. All these guys. And it's I understand why, if they only wanted to do one representative per game outside of the DLC, which the DLC had very specific, parameters, it was based on, Choose Your Legends winners or something like that. So it's not, the end of the world. But the fact that only one of the protagonists of FE8 is represented in a game that supposedly, theoretically, is bringing back every single lord as a representative of each of their past games. It's a little bit of a bummer that we only got to see Erica instead of seeing both Erica and Ephraim, sharing a ring, similar to how Edelgard, Dimitri, and Claude had the same thing going on. And then they were a free DLC ring. I think were they free? No, actually, they might not have been free. I don't remember. But they all got to share the same ring. They all got to be in the same ring, and they all had dialogue and stuff like that. So it's a little bit of a shame. I would have liked to see Ephraim get a little bit more representation there. Because FEA is just not a game that they call back to a lot. It's not a game that that gets a lot of love and attention from the modern Insist devs. But it is what it is, FE8 fans will probably be eating forever. And that's the other thing, right? Because even older games like Gaiden, Genealogy, Binding Blade, those games have potential remakes on the table, right? Obviously, we already got one for Gaiden. People are saying, theoretically, FE4 might be getting one, possibly FE6, people aren't really talking about an FE8 remake in the same way, which is, so it feels like they're one of the least represented games, one of the least represented games in modern Fire Emblem, which is a shame. I would like to see more of that representation going forward, but we'll see what happens. Okay, with all of that out of the way, I think that we can go ahead and get into talking about the actual game itself. Finally, we're almost 25 minutes in, and we're just now getting into the actual game itself. I just had a lot to cover in this preamble, so hopefully you can forgive my meandering. So you start up a new game, and there's an opening cutscene. And it's a little bit different than the one from FE7. FE7 was kind of like a backstory, lore dump, basically. Very similar to what we got just by starting a new game. It was a little bit different, but it covered basically the same information. FE8's is more like a cinematic that plays. It's a little bit on the simple side. It mostly uses just in-game portraits and stuff rather than full artwork for the characters. But it's still cool to see that they were doing a little bit more of a stylistic thing rather than. I mean, the FE7 intro cutscene was stylistic for sure, but it's definitely a lot more bombastic than the ones in the previous games, which I think is a fitting. Maybe not fitting, but I think it's a nice change of pace from what the series has done up to this point, and I appreciated it. When you go to start up a new game, you are blessedly given, for the first time in the series, the proper ability to select your difficulty. For the first time, every single game before now, you've either had to complete a full playthrough of the game before you're given a difficulty select. There is no difficulty select at all, in the case of, like, FE1, I guess. Or you had to enter the fucking Konami code for Paragon mode in FE2 and FE5. Those were your options for difficulty for every other game prior to this one. You just start up the new game in FE8 and you can pick easy, normal, difficult. Beautiful. Mwah, no notes. The note I have is that difficult mode is still really easy. That's what we're going to be playing on for this playthrough. Just as a reminder, in case you're new, hopping on with FE8. We don't play any particular difficulty. We don't always do the most difficult one. I just do whichever that I think is the most fun for me, which tends to be like sort of middle of the road. I don't really like I don't really like Fire Emblem to be like super duper hard. I don't really like playing Maddening or Lunatic in the more modern games. I played FE6 on normal mode for the podcast, so we're not always going to be going balls to the wall. But I also like there to be some degree of challenge, right? Like I want to have to think and strategize a little bit, which is why we're going to be, we're not going to be, we're going to be going for the most difficult option available to us here in FE8, which is difficult mode. Easy mode, I will say, I think I commented on this in the FE7 episodes when I was complaining about Lin mode. Easy mode includes tutorials, and it has like a little thing that says, if you pick this mode, you'll learn how to play the game, which I did on my first playthrough because I didn't know how to play the game. So I wanted to get some tutorials and stuff like that. But on normal mode and on hard mode, they thankfully spare you from the tutorials, even if it is your first playthrough on a fresh save file. And it's all like basic stuff, There's nothing new from the basics of how these games work, right? Like it's in its fundamentals, FE8 is very, very similar to FE6 and FE7. It's not our first rodeo. We've been around the block a couple times, and I think the game allows us to acknowledge that by selecting the harder difficulty and trusting that we will be okay. Which is nice, I appreciate that that ability to do that, as opposed to FE7 where you didn't have the choice, which was a bummer. We're given the requisite backstory dump, which is essentially, it's a little bit different than in previous games. In fact, dragons do exist in this game, but dragons aren't like very relevant to the backstory of the world like at all, at least not in what we're presented here. Instead, we're told about the Demon King, where the Demon King ruled the world, and he had monsters and creatures that ran amok. But then along came Zeus. No, what actually came along was the Sacred Stones. The Sacred Stones were given to mankind after they pleaded to the heavens for an answer to the Demon King. The Sacred Stones had the power to seal away evil, and so they did that. They successfully fought against the Demon King and sealed him away. And peace has reigned for many, many, many years, over 800 years, I believe, is what they say. But now, because it's the time period that the game is set in, it's time for some peace to be undone. And we're given the overarching continent map. This is the new continent of Magvel. This is a game set in a new continent. As far as the game makes explicit, I believe this is the only game in the series that is completely disconnected from every other game in the series. Every single other game in the series, I guess, well, no, that's not true anymore. It used to be true. For a very, very long time it was true. Up until FE16. I mean, I guess Fates, if you count Fates as one game, that was its own thing. Fates, there are 3 different Fates games, so you could argue that those are all connected with each other. But until FE16, which is the only game to take place in Fodlan, I guess you could count 3 Hopes if you want to. Depending on how you want to stretch this definition, maybe it's true up to Engage. FE8 is one of the only, if that's a better qualifier, one of the only games in the series to not be interconnected with any others, either through lore or taking place on the same continent or anything like that. It is completely separate. Magvel is its own continent that we never see again. And it's home to a few different countries, which we're given an overview of here. I do think that the descriptions of some of the countries they give here are interesting. There's the 5 main nations that the descendants of the original Sacred Stones wielders were, they founded these nations. There's the Kingdom of Rene. There is the Kingdom of Frelia. There is the desert nation of Gehenna or Gehenna. I don't remember which it is. I think it's Gehenna. There's the theocracy of Rouston. A theocracy being sort of it's kind of like a kingdom, but where they believe in like the divine rule. I believe Egypt was a theocracy, wasn't it? I think something like that. And then the Empire of Grotto is to the south. And they're all chilling for a really long time. Presumably, they're like very close allies and friends for years and years and years. Peace has reigned in the continent for 800 plus years or whatever it is. I have some thoughts. I'm not really going to get into most of them this episode, but I do have some thoughts on why it's a little confusing that a continent that's been in an era of peace for so long would have such competent standing armies and like border patrols and things like that. I'm not 100% sure about that. I mean, you can make all sorts of reasons, but essentially everybody's really chill with each other. Everybody seems to be like mostly allied together and not really causing any problems. That is, until one day, out of seemingly nowhere, the Grotto Empire invades their northern neighbor of Rene, which is the home country of our 2 protagonists. The game explains to us that the Prince of Rene, Ephraim, is missing. No one knows where he is. So that's, throwing things into further chaos. The king doesn't know where the prince is. And, with Grotto invading, he doesn't really have much time to worry about it or figure it out. Oh, I did forget to mention Carcino. Carcino is also there. They don't have a sacred stone, but they're an emerging mercantile republic. Is what the game describes them as. So they're also there. We don't really know where they fall on like political lines and all that. But the Grotto invasion is of pressing concern to the king of Rene. And we did see that the chapter title earlier. I did forget to mention it, but now seems like a good a time as any, because I think this is where the title card for it shows up after this opening map monologue. And this chapter is known as The Fall of Rene. So we cut to the inside of Castle Rene, where the king is with Princess Erica. The king is informed that Grotto has completely overrun their forces. They don't stand a chance. They're gonna get defeated. So the king orders everybody to surrender. And the king decides that he's gonna stay behind and not escape the castle, because he wants to know what the hell's going on, right? Like he wants to figure out why Grotto would do this. They've been allies for a very long time, and he really has no idea why Grotto would suddenly evade like this. And I think this is a pretty cool moment for the king, whose name is Fado, by the way. Fado says, like, is this my fault somehow? Like, have I done something to offend them or, like, threaten them that would cause them to do this? I need to know what's going on. So he decides that he's going to stay behind, but he does order one of his knights, Seth, to grab Erica and run away. Essentially, Erica puts up a little bit of a fight because she doesn't want to leave her dad behind, but Seth does eventually just grab her and get her to leave. They flee the castle together with another cavalier named Franz, who Seth orders to run ahead and bring word of their coming to Frelia, which is a nearby nation that Fado thinks will be a safe haven for Erica for the time being. However, before Seth and Erica can get away, they are accosted by a Wyvern Knight, which actually, I like that this scene gives us an opportunity to see one of the new classes that this game introduces, because there are several new classes in this game that we're seeing for the first time, Wyvern, at least compared to the other GBA games. Wyvern Knight is one of them. It's a much more, in my opinion at least, a much more like sinister looking Wyvern Lord, where it's a lot like the body is a lot more snake-like, and he has like sharp fangs, and it looks kind of like a basilisk type thing. Like this is like they only have wings, they don't have front legs, so I guess this would anatomically correct wyvern, as opposed to the other like wyverns that we've seen in the GBA games, which have been effectively just dragons, but they're called wyverns for some reason. Anyway, Volter is a general of Grotto, and he attacks Seth, leaving him injured, but Seth does manage to get away, seemingly because Volter allowed him to escape. Volter seems to be the type of guy who likes to savor the kill. So he even says as much. He says explicitly, more time to savor the kill. So it seems like he lets him get away on purpose. He definitely could have just beaten Seth right here, but he doesn't. He allows him to escape. Volter does introduce himself as the Moonstone, which is, we don't really understand what that means right now, but I did make a note of it because I think it gives me some stuff to think about when we find out more details about what's going on in Grotto a little bit later on in this set of chapters. So I'll make a mental note of that Volter in this scene refers to himself as the Moonstone. Volter also has a really cool line here, where he says to Seth, I am Volter the Moonstone, etc., whatever, and then he says, you are just the corpse who does not know he is dead, which is a sick line, very menacing, and follows it up very effectively. As I said, he does leave Seth pretty injured, and in fact, mechanically, Seth remains injured. He is at low HP for the entire next map. Not that it actually matters. It's unbelievably unlikely that Seth will actually die in prologue, but the fact that he is left at low HP, I think, does a good job of sticking Volter in your head as like, oh shit, this guy like means business. He actually like mechanically affected how I have to play the next map, which is pretty fun. So Seth and Erica get away, and they flee. They have a moment to catch their breath, but it's not long before some Grotto soldiers catch up to them. And Seth and Erica realize that they're going to have to fight, or else Erica is going to be captured. And that is where the chapter properly begins. This is where we get control of our characters for the first time. Now, I have to say, before we start talking about anything related to gameplay, I really, really, really liked this opening section. I think it had a lot of energy. It does such a good job hooking the player into the story, more so than I would say any of the other games that we've looked at so far. You start off in the middle of a crisis. It feels so high energy, so like desperate. Seth has to like force Erica to leave the castle. He gets injured on their way out. Like everyone's freaking out, everyone's panicking. There's a big mystery element of like, why is Grotto doing this? It's a lot more interesting of an opener, I think, than some of the previous games where things start off a lot more tame. Even in games like FE4 or FE6, which do start off in the middle of their main conflicts happening. Like the main conflicts of those games are the inciting incidents that the game kicks off on. I feel like this game does a much better job of actually making you feel like in the middle of it. You know what I mean? It's like a desperate escape scene, which is cool. It's neat. And I like that a lot. Erica decides that she has to fight alongside Seth. I think Seth wants her to stay back. But she says, no, I can fight too. I want to fight as well. I don't want you to be on your own, especially with that injury. So Seth agrees. He gives her a rapier. Erica is the third GBA lord to have a personal weapon as a rapier, which is pretty fun. Fire Emblem lords do get a lot of rapiers. As we know, Chrom uses rapiers in most of his games. But Erica also uses the rapier in this one. And it works, identically to how it does in previous games. I think I don't know if the exact stats are the same. I think it's about the same. But they're effective against cavalry and knights. which is a bad matchup for it because most of those enemies will have weapon triangle advantage over Erica, and hit her really hard with her very squishy defense. But I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself because we got to talk about the characters. We got to talk about the characters that we have access to right now. Right now we just have two. We just have Erica and Seth. Erica, as I mentioned, gets the rapier, and as I sort of alluded to there a second ago, she's very similar stat distribution wise to Lynn. She's fast but frail, and a little bit on the weaker side. And that can be pretty bad. I actually think that Erica is one of the weaker lords in the entire series. I don't really know how I would argue she stacks up against Lynn, because I think that like she's in an easier game, so it's a little bit harder to use her. But the Mani Kadi is also pretty good with its crit rate. It can be useful even just as the rapier is not as useful as the Mani Kadi in my opinion. In some ways, she compares more directly to Eliwood because, they're both swordlock, footlock units with a rapier that both promote onto horses. And I think that Erica is a little bit better than Eliwood because, again, she's in an easier game and a little bit faster, so she hits doubling thresholds a little bit more reliably a little bit earlier on. But at the same time, Eliwood has lances, so like when he promotes, so it's a little bit hard to argue that Erica's better, but then by the time that Eliwood gets lances, he's probably so bad that he can barely even make use of them. I don't know. It's kind of a loser battle when it comes to the GBA lords. At least Roy's out here like, yeah, you have to get me to the throne, so at the very least you're not gonna like stick me in the back lines and not let me do anything. Not to mention he can be useful towards the end of the game with the binding blade. But that's neither here nor there. I like Erica as a character. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the stuff that she says and the stuff that she goes through over these couple of chapters. But in terms of gameplay, I've tried to use her many times, and it doesn't work out for me more often than it does. She's hit a few strength level ups for me in these early chapters, so I'm hoping that she starts to become a little bit more useful. And she's been dealing with the early game enemies pretty well, but I don't know how consistently that's gonna hold true. We'll have to see, but I'm hoping that she can stick it out for the long term. Okay, but now let's get to the one that you guys all really want to hear about, because next up we are going to be talking about Seth, who is the Jagan of this game. The Jagan archetype, as I've elaborated on in the beginning of every Fire Emblem game that we talked about up to this point, the gist is that they are units who start off very strong and are supposed to become weaker as the game goes on, but in practice that rarely is actually the case. At best, they tend to fall behind your other units as the game goes on, but they still are perfectly serviceable in their own right. And in several games, they're like strong enough to hold their own even into the late and end game. Even if, like, statistically they might be slightly weaker than your other guys, they still get the job done just fine. No problem whatsoever. Seth is a little bit different, because Seth is not just a good unit. Seth is not just a fantastic Jagan who is extremely strong at the beginning of the game, and like characters like FE7 Marcus or FE9 Titania, like those characters, he does manage to stay relevant into the late game. The main difference is that while I would argue that FE7 Marcus and FE9 Titania do very slightly fall off compared to your other units, not enough to actually make a practical difference, but like in terms of stats, Marcus might have some doubling issues. In my experience, Titania tends to be a little bit frail as the game goes on. Again, nothing that these characters aren't like still contributing in the end game chapters, but it is like worth mentioning, right? Like your growth units might end up surpassing them over time. That is not the case with Seth. I'm going to read you Seth's growth rates now, and you see if you can spot what's good about these growth rates. All right, 80% HP, 40% strength, 40% skill, 50% speed, 40% luck, 25% defense, 20% resistance. Now you might think, oh, well, that's like pretty good, obviously very high for a Jagan, but like, the defense growth's a little bit low. The strength growth could be better, it's not like these not like his growths are like off the charts or anything. And this is the moment where I tell you that those were actually the growth rates of Franz, who is a level 1 cavalier who joins us next chapter and is ostensibly supposed to be the growth cavalier in this game. I'm going to read to you Seth's actual growth rates now. 90% HP, 50% strength, 45% skill, 45% speed, 25% luck, 40% defense, and 30% resistance. On the Jagan, whose stats, by the way, whose base stats are 30 HP, 14 strength, 13 skill, 12 speed, 13 luck, 11 defense, 8 resistance, and 11 constitution. So, yeah, in terms of growth rates, Seth, our Jagan, outclasses Franz, our growth cavalier, quote-unquote growth cavalier, in every single stat except for speed, where Franz has a 5% advantage, and luck, where Franz has a 15% advantage. Every single other stat, Seth is doing at least a little bit better, and sometimes substantially better. 10% higher strength growth and defense growth. 15% higher defense growth, 10% strength and resistance and HP, and a little bit of a higher skill growth as well. So Seth is a growth unit, right? Like, they give him the growth rates of just like your normal average unit in this game, which was so bizarre. And I'm not really sure why they did this. I do have some speculation, and it kind of goes into Seth as a character, because as a character, Seth is consistently characterized, I guess, as being that guy. He is him. He is the man. Seth is goated with the sauce in this game. Everybody talks about how cool Seth is. Even the villains are like, damn, Seth's super strong. They're like all afraid of him, right? They're like, damn, this guy's really tough. And I think that it would be a little bit anticlimactic if Seth like fell off over the course of the game. So in that sense, I think they prioritized narrative importance over like the gameplay satisfaction of like your growth units ending up being better and surpassing Seth, because they just don't. Seth will, I mean, they have more levels to grow. It is actually pretty realistic that Seth will hit level 20 by the end of the game, which is very, very rare even for pre-promoted units. But because you're expected, maybe not expected, but because Seth is so easy to just send into every map, kill a whole bunch of enemies, kill every boss, which he gets like decent experience from, because of all that, Seth is just like, it's just gonna end up being a really high level, getting really good growths, really good level ups probably. I mean, I guess he could get unlucky, but he's gonna be surpassing most of your growth units even into the end game chapters, which is insane. He's a Jagan. Jagans don't need any help being the best units in their respective games, or at least like top 3 in their respective games. For the most part, I like almost all of them are, I would argue. Maybe a couple of exceptions like Vander, but that's about it. Seth is not only the best unit in this game, I also think that he is a contender for the best unit in the entire series. I think some of the avatars in later games might surpass him, but even then, I don't even think all of them do. I think like maybe Robin and Corrin, and I would even argue potentially not even them. I think it's a matter of perspective, and a matter of like what difficulty you're playing on. It's truly insane how centralizing Seth is in this game, and it is for that reason that I am going to be benching Seth for my playthrough. So I benched Seth the very first time that I played through this game, and not because I was a new Fire Emblem player who was buying into the propaganda of Jagans, right? Because if you know anything about Jagans, in the Fire Emblem community, there's a lot of discourse about Jagans. I don't know if if this discourse still exists. This might have been a relic of like 20, 20, like late 20 odds, or early 20 teens, Reddit discourse, right? But there was a prevailing mindset in the community that Jagans are not worth using because they steal experience from your other guys, they fall off, etc., etc. And it was never true. But I didn't know that at the time, right? Like that was something that I bought into eventually. For a little while before I played enough games to realize, wait a minute, this is full of shit. But I wasn't exposed to the community at all when I played this game for the first time. So my thought process for benching Seth was that he was legitimately making the game too easy, and I was just not having as much fun because I was using him to kill everything, and I just didn't think that was very fun. There was a moment I remember exactly when it was that I made this decision too. It was a moment in Chapter 8, which is where Erica and Ephraim reunite. We are going to be spoiling, I'm going to be doing this entire podcast under the assumption that you have played FE8. So if you haven't, there will be spoilers, just as a heads up. When Erica and Ephraim reunite in Chapter 8, I was having Seth throw javelins over a wall where magic units and archers were trying to attack him from the other side, and he was just not taking any damage. He was killing all of them. And when I saw that was happening, I was like, Seth is just too good. He's not only is he killing everything in his path, he's also clearing out later sections of the chapter so that I don't have to engage with those later on either. Which was just insane to me. The fact that one unit could do literally everything I needed him to do with absolutely no downsides or repercussions was ridiculous to me, and I didn't feel like I was going to be engaged in the way that I wanted to be while playing this game. So I decided to bench Seth. And I bring that up because I think it would be fun if, in some ways, this playthrough for the podcast echoed my very first time playing this game. I did temporarily toy around with the idea, very briefly, of using the same team that I did for my first playthrough. I do remember most of it. Not all of it, but most of it. And I considered that for a little while, but a lot of the choices on units that I decided to use in that first playthrough, I look at that list now and I'm like, I don't know if I would want to do this again. Shit like Warrior Ross, like Sniper and Amy, things like that. Units that I don't really have as much fun using nowadays, especially in those particular classes. So I decided that I wasn't going to be doing an exact one-to-one replica. Rogue Colm was another one, because Rogue just seemed cool to me. Nowadays I don't really like Rogue all that much, but it was a neat idea, but I decided not to go forward with it. However, I do want to carry over a couple of ideas from that first playthrough, and see if I can recapture some of what I was cooking way back when, or maybe I wasn't cooking anything at all. Maybe bro wasn't cooking shit. I don't know. But yeah, so that's the reason I'm going to be benching Seth. It's not because he's not good. It's not because I don't like using him. I love him as a character. He's one of my favorite characters in the whole game, actually. But I just I still to this day, I think that he's just so over centralizing that I find it hard to enjoy just stomping entire maps with him. It's just not really fun for me. I'd rather use my growth units. I'd rather have characters like Franz and Erica and other units like that contribute over the course of the game. I am actually going to be not using a couple of really strong units in this game. I'm not using Vanessa. I'm not using who is another one? I mean, I wouldn't describe him as really good, but I usually use Ross. I'm not going to be using Ross this playthrough. I felt like mixing it up a little bit. I've used most of the characters in this game. It's a relatively small cast, and a pretty short game. I think this is, if you account for the route split, if you don't account for the route split, it is by far the shortest Fire Emblem game. Even if you do, I think it might still be the shortest, although it's probably a little bit closer, because there's I want to say there's 21, I think there's 21 numbered chapters, and then 5x, and then the route split adds an additional 6. There's 6 Erica route maps and 6 Ephraim route maps, so that would be 28, which is pretty short. Most games have more than that number, just not even including guidance or paralogs in the modern games. So if we're looking at all of those options put together, of course, this game also has like skirmish battles in the Tower of Olney and the Lagdao ruins. So if you add all that together, maybe it's not the shortest game, but it's pretty close. It's pretty low down there, I would say. Okay. There's not much to say about the map itself here. It's a very basic tutorial map. It's very similar to some of the early Lin mode maps. In fact, I would say it's actually easier than most of them. You either kill everything with Seth, or if you want to train Erica, you feed the kills here to Erica. That's really all you do. There's not much to say here. There's a cutscene towards the end, or at the end of the chapter, where Erica talks about how sad she is that she doesn't like fighting, which is like not. It's a little bit generic of an angle to take with a lord, especially like a female lord, for her to be like, oh no, I don't like fighting. I'd rather solve solutions with words. It's a little bit of gender essentialism, I think. But it's a nice character moment for Erica, because I think it's a good moment of reflection for her on like, this is what I'm going to have to be doing for a while, if I want to make it out of this alive, which is nice. She also does mention Leon. Leon is a character who's going to become, significantly more important as the story goes on. And something that I really, really like about this game is how they continue to drop details about Leon progressively more and more, without, actually telling you who he is or what, giving you progressively more information about him, without like tipping their hand too much on what his deal is. They actually, something I completely forgot to mention, is that in the cutscene where Erica is running away from the castle, after Erica leaves, the camera is still in the castle, and we see like all the Grotto troops pull up, and Emperor Vigard is there. Emperor Vigard is there, and then also there is another character by his side who we do not know who it is at this point, but we do find out later that is Leon. We just see his overworld sprite, or his map sprite, I guess, which is like a nice like when you're playing through this game a second time and you know what Leon's map sprite looks like. It's like, oh hey, yeah, that's him there, and then of course he gets name dropped in this conversation with Erica. I don't remember exactly what she says about him. She's talking about like, she and Ephraim and Leon are like all really good friends. And so I think she talks about like them like play fighting or like training after their studies or whatever it is, something like that, talking about their relationship together. But we don't know who Leon is at this point. She just says Leon. She doesn't say anything about him. I think this is a really strong start to the game. Not mechanically, the map is terrible. I really wish that games would stop doing this. This is something that we see quite a few times in several Fire Emblem games, where the early maps are just like basically boring tutorials. They don't really have anything going on, and I don't really get why they feel this is necessary in so many games, when games like FE5, FE6, most of the older games, and then even a few of the newer ones, I think, what's a good example? Actually, maybe they haven't done it in a while, have they? Yeah, actually, maybe FE7, maybe FE6 was the last one, where they had like a real chapter 1. Chapter 1 in several of the older games were like real maps, like they were, and FE11 and 12, I guess, have that as well. Unless you count, FE12 doesn't, because it has the prologue, which is new, which is added on. So, maybe just FE11. I don't get why they do this. I don't get why like the 4x6 maps are considered like worthwhile. I don't really get what they add to the game that you couldn't just have with like a more traditional map, maybe on the easier side, but a more traditional map. I just think it would be a little bit less tedious to go through some of this early game shit, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, and that's the end of the prologue. Next up we have chapter 1, which is called Escape. We get a POV shot from a place called Border Mulan, which is where Erica and Seth are headed. There is a girl there conferring with some of her soldiers. She is Princess Tana of Frelia, which is the northern nation. And I think she serves a relatively important role in the story here, because at this point, it's been very established that Grotto was an ally nation of Renee. But then they betrayed them and turned on them at the last second, in a complete surprise attack. So the natural question for both Erica and the audience, especially the audience. Erica probably has a little bit more faith in Frelia than we as an audience do. But, they seem so sure that Frelia is going to be on their side, despite the fact that they've been betrayed by Grotto. So, like, why are they so confident? And we as an audience get to see that, in fact, yes, Tana is very... she's looking for Erica. She wants to be there to meet up with Erica when she crosses the border. So they want to make sure that she's safe. So it establishes that Tana is on Erica's side. And by extension, Frelia as a whole is there for Erica and an ally of Renee. Which is good, because at this point we have no idea like who's who. We don't know like who's on whose side or anything like that. Is it just Grotto that's in on this, or could the other nations be involved as well? Unfortunately, Grotto's troops do beat Erica to this fortress, and their leader, who's a knight named Brigitte, he rolls up and 1% crits the NPC mercenary that's on guard here, and takes over the whole fortress, which is pretty funny. I like that he's just like, yeah, don't worry, I'll handle this on my own, and simply just obliterates this fucking guy. It's really funny. So they take Tana as a hostage. And you guys have to to come in and clear out the Grotto soldiers and save her. In fact, actually, when Erica and Seth roll up, Seth wants to just move on. Like, okay, well, this was a bust. The Grotto soldiers are already here. So we gotta move on. Erica doesn't know that Tana is there, obviously. But she does say, I've seen, on our way out of Renee, I saw a lot of atrocities being committed by the Grotto soldiers. I don't want to just run away from them at every turn. I want to take a stand and fight against them. And so Seth acquiesces and decides that they'll fight their way through. And that's where the chapter begins. Erica and Seth have to fight their way a little bit. This is another, really basic map. I would go as far as to say that it's another, tutorial tier map. I think you could maybe even argue that the next one is as well, but that one's a little bit better. This one's just so basic and so boring. There's really very little to say about the gameplay of this map. It introduces reinforcements for the first time. Some reinforcements do come in from behind you after a few turns. But that's really about it. We're given 2 new units on this map, though, which is worth mentioning. This chapter does introduce also forts, which you can take advantage of, which is pretty nice. It's a nice little introduction to how certain terrain works. It's an introduction to gates. There's a house here that will give you a tutorial about gates, and the siege objective and all that. But really, the most noteworthy thing that happens in this chapter is that we're given 2 new units. One of them is Franz, who we have met before. Franz was ordered by, Seth, to run ahead and give Frelia a heads up that they were on their way. And so he returns. He's a cavalier, as I said. He's theoretically the growth cavalier of the game. The problem is that he has worse growth than Seth. So there's genuinely absolutely no reason to use him instead of Seth. I mean, really, when it comes to GBA era paladins, you want to be using multiple, right? Like, they're just so good. They're such a good class. And I do sometimes use Franz. I think Franz is a fun unit. I think the fact that his growths are a little bit on the lower side. Growths in general in this game are not fantastic. But Franz's in particular always felt a little bit on the lower end to me, and that wasn't that was never super fun for me. But I do use them sometimes. Paladins in the GBA games are just super fun to use. There's an argument to be made. I've been seeing people say that Franz is a little bit overrated recently, because he does there are certain units in the beginning of the game that if you're playing relatively efficiently, you want to be giving experience to over Franz. Meanwhile, you have characters like Seth and Franz and Kyle who have chapter 5x with almost completely uncontested experience. So you might want to feed them instead of him. But I think I definitely I don't think I think that's a little bit. I think it's a little bit hooey. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I think that it's okay to I think giving Franz experience is is worthwhile. I can I don't think that you have to min max to that extent in a game like this. It's just it's so easy. And your characters are gonna get to Juggernaut status anyway. It's just a matter of whether they get there like an extra chapter or two later than they would otherwise. I don't know. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me to say that Franz isn't worth training. Paladins are so good. And they're very. I think it's worth having like multiple of them, maybe even three, right? Like if you want to use Seth and then Franz and then either Ford or Kyle, like that works. I don't know. I think Franz is definitely worth putting experience into. But if you don't want to either, that's fine. Also, there's definitely other growth units that you can put your time into early Erica or early pre-route split units that you can put your experience into. Gilliam is bad. Gilliam is very, very bad. So he is an armor knight. I should talk about the promotion options. Gilliam is an armor knight, and he is not very good. Mostly on account of just having bad stats. Like, that's really what it boils down to, right? Like, you think of Oswin in FE7, and he was good. I would argue that Oswin is a pretty damn good unit. I wouldn't say he's, like, top tier or anything, but I think he's good. I think he's worth using. I think you can absolutely make a case for him to be used, like, most of the game, maybe even the whole game. I think that he's actually a little bit underrated, just because of, like, the average player just, like, is just not... It's just gonna like steamroll so much of the game with him, you know. Even on Hector hard mode, he just doesn't take any fucking damage. So I definitely think it's worth deploying Oswin in a lot of maps throughout FE7. The problem is that Oswin has good stats. Oswin just has really good base stats, which is what makes him worth using, despite the fact that he's in a bad class. And Gilliam does not have that luxury. Gilliam is in a bad class, and his base stats are like fine. You know, like his defense is pretty good. His strength is like solid, you know, compared to like Franz and Erica, I guess. But it's not like out of this world good. And he has accuracy issues. His skill isn't that great, and because his speed is so bad, his defense isn't high enough where like if he's getting doubled, he's still gonna take like decent damage from like enemies that are doubling him. So it's just really not worth using him. If you really like him and you want to use him, that's completely fine. Some people just like using armor knights. That's totally reasonable. I respect that. But it's not. It's just not. I've never had much fun using Gilliam, and I am a certified armor knight enjoyer. I really like using armor knights in a lot of games. The problem is that like, in order for me to enjoy using an armor knight, they have to feel like I'm actually getting something out of purposefully having to handicap myself by playing slowly in order to get them to keep up with the rest of my units. And I get that with Oswin. I get a unit who is going to be consistently doing really well in combat to justify the fact that I might have to slow down or rescue drop him, or just like take a little bit longer on maps and have other characters go do other objectives, right? While I have Oswin hold down the fort on one objective, maybe I have people running around to do other stuff. That's all fine, and I feel like I can trust Oswin to get it done. And I do not feel that same way about Gilliam. I think Gilliam is just bad. I apologize to any Gilliam stands out there, but he's just not. He's not doing it. He's not hacking it, in my opinion. Okay. Promotions in this game are fun. They work similarly to FE6 and FE7. There are different types of promotion items where once a character hits level 10, you give them a different promotion item depending on their class. In this case, both Gilliam and Franz use a Knight Crest, which is another issue compounding Gilliam's problems. Is that he competes for a resource with Franz, who is a pretty good unit, I would argue, and he's just not. He is not on that same level. So if you want to promote one of them, I would definitely recommend Franz. And even if you don't want to use Franz, again, Ford and Kyle are there, and they can be pretty competent as well. There's really just no universe where you're promoting Gilliam, because even if you like using Armor Knights, you're probably just gonna use Amelia anyway, right? So like, what's the fucking point? I don't know. I do not see the vision with Gilliam. I really don't. I'm sorry. But they promote, however, once you use the promotion item, the majority of classes in this game have two different choices. when promoting. Again, there's only a handful of exceptions. Erica and Ephraim both have story-based promotions, and they can only choose, or they can't choose at all. They only get one class option that they just promote to automatically. But the majority of other characters that can promote, I think maybe literally every other character that can promote has the choice when they promote between two different classes. I already did give the examples for both of these classes earlier on in my spiel about split promotions at the beginning of the episode, but I'll repeat it here. For Gilliam, his options as a knight are general, which is just the usual, that's what knight normally promotes into in these games, or the new class, Great Knight. Great Knight is a class, I think it's like, there's been classes named Great Knight. I think there was a class that was like pretty similar in FE5, but the gist is that they're like bulkier paladins. That's the idea, right? You're on a horse, but you're also armored. In fact, you take damage from both cavalry effective weaponry like riders' bands, but also armor effective weaponry like horse slayers. So you're supposed to be bulky, right? That's the idea. The problem is, well, okay, so the idea, well, I'll talk about the problems with Great Knight when we get to Franz. For Gilliam, it is by far the best option because it gives him 2 points of movement. You get 6 move on promotion instead of 5, which is, that just makes you like a normal infantry unit. A little bit different because forests slow you down way more, deserts slow you down tremendously. But for the most part, you're basically just a 6 move infantry unit like Sage or Bishop or whatever, Warrior, etc. General theoretically has a defense bonus. However, and I'm not going to bring up the difference in promotion gains for every single class. However, I will say that most of the time they are, if there is a benefit, like let's say for general, there may be a benefit in terms of bulk going general over Great Knight. However, in most cases, it is either extremely minimal or sometimes the idea that the class is going for is just not represented in the stat boosts at all. Like, I don't know if general is actually an example of this, but there are some instances where, like, let's say you're like, oh, well, general is the bulkier option, but they get the same defense on promotion, let's say, or like I think Swordmaster is like Swordmaster over Assassin, like those are the Myrmidon promotion options, Swordmaster or Assassin, and Swordmaster just gives you like a bunch of shit, whereas Assassin gives you almost nothing. So like a lot of the times the stat boosts of the class that is theoretically supposed to give you an advantage or one stat or another, they just don't. It's just not real. It just doesn't actually exist. I would encourage you to look into this because I guarantee you there's a couple classes in this game where you're like, oh yeah, this seems like it should be the faster one or the stronger one or the bulkier one, and it just isn't. It's just not. There's no class growths in this game, so like promoting to general doesn't give Gilliam a higher defense growth. It's coming entirely from promotion gains. So if he gets like 1 extra point of defense from general to Great Knight, whoopee fucking do. Like what's more useful, that or the 1 additional point of movement that you're going to be getting, right? Like movement is like a pretty important stat, even if you're not trying to play fast, because it's just nice to be more flexible with your units, right? Like being able to move around, to escape danger, to rescue drop and stuff like that. It's just handy to have movement that can allow you to position your units more freely, compared to like generals who have to really struggle to get around. And then we have Franz, who is in the opposite situation, where Great Knight is the worst option of his 2 choices by a lot. So as a Cavalier, he has the option to promote into either a Great Knight or a Paladin. And this is like one of those examples, right, where Great Knight isn't even very like bulky compared to Paladin. The difference in bulk is like extremely negligible, I'm pretty sure. And you actually lose movement when you promote from a Cavalier to a Great Knight. You go from 7 movement to 6, which is insane, right? Like this game, I think one of the ways that this game like makes balancing the classes a little bit better is that promoted mounted classes do not always have 8 movement in this game. In previous games, I'm pretty sure all did. Maybe Eliwood's class promotion was an exception. I don't remember. But like Paladins, Falcon Knights, Wyvern Lords, and Valkyries all had 8 movement, I'm pretty sure. And in this game, there are a lot of mounted classes like Mage Knight or Valkyrie that don't have 8 movement. They only have 7. So you're only losing on 1 point of movement compared to like Sage or Bishop. Which is like, that's pretty significant, but it's not like the end of the world, right? Like it's like if you preferred like General over Great Knight, or if you preferred Sage over Mage Knight, it doesn't feel like you're actively kneecapping yourself. 2 points of movement, on the other hand, kinda does. 2 points of movement feels very, very, very shitty to pass up on. I have made Cavaliers into Great Knights before, because Great Knight's a fun class. I like it aesthetically. So like I'm not opposed to doing it, right? Like it's not like I never pick the worst options. Even if the worst option is like significantly worse, you know, I enjoy using characters in those classes sometimes. It's just like, it's like, what were they cooking? Like, why did they do this? What were they thinking? You know, what would have possessed them to make a class that was so much worse than Paladin in every single way, and then expect anybody to actually pick it? You know? I mean, like, later games sort of have this issue as well. In my opinion, it is mitigated drastically by class skills. Because certain classes might have skills that you want. You know, like Great Knight has some good skills that you might want to get from that class line, which is why you might go Great Knight with Sully instead of Paladin, you know? I would say Paladin is still better. You know, you could, like, there's always going to be discrepancy between classes. There's never going to be, like, perfect, you know, every class is equally as good as each other. I don't even know if I would say that's desirable, but even if it was, it's never going to happen. But they can definitely make certain classes feel unique or have interesting niches. Now, I'm glad that I caught myself on this, because I actually did just remember something that I forgot to talk about. Some of the classes in this game do have skills. General is one such class. General has a skill called Great Shield, where sometimes I believe it is a percentage based on the enemy's level, which is idiotic, first of all, but is a percentage chance that they will take no damage from whatever attack it is, which is like completely worthless, right? Most of the time they're going to be taking pretty low damage anyway, because they're a general, that's their whole thing. But also it's just like not high enough to be reliable. Even the skills in other classes like Sure Shot or Pierce are like pretty mediocre, because you just can't rely on them to proc often enough to make a meaningful difference in your combat, as opposed to later games which have like skill percent chances to proc things. You know, like soul tanking and awakening is a real thing, because soul, you can count on soul to proc pretty often, you know, compared to this game where like Great Shield is not going to proc, like it's going to proc like very, very rarely, and when it does, you know, there's no guarantee that it's going to actually make a difference on anything that's going on. So there's a, you know, Sniper has one of these, Wyvern Knight has one of these. I don't know why they decided to give one to Wyvern Knight. I like Wyvern Knight is so funny to me, because it's the combined, it's sort of like Great Knight for Cavalier and Knight. It's the same sort of idea for Pegasus Knight and Wyvern Rider. Where both Pegasus Knight and Wyvern Rider have like their own unique options, but then they can both promote into Wyvern Knight, and it is the better option for both of them, and yet that was the one that they decided to give the skill to for some reason. I really don't know what they were thinking with that one. Maybe they thought that the losing access to swords was like a really big deal. I don't know. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that on, I guess, next chapter when we get Vanessa. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's really all I had to say about this. Paladin is the better option for Franz, obviously. These are some of the more lopsided choices, I think. There's not a whole lot in the game that I think are more one-sided than this. There's a couple that come close, but we'll get to those as we go through. Okay, that's really all I had to say for gameplay in this chapter. There's not much going on. It teaches you how to use forts, it teaches you about reinforcements, but beyond that, it's a pretty straightforward affair. Oh, I really do like the recruitment theme in this game, though. The recruitment theme that plays when you play when Gilliam and Franz show up. It's called Comrades. It's the recruitment theme for this game. It's the equivalent to Together We Ride from FE7. And it's pretty good. I like it. It obviously is very heavily inspired by Together We Ride. It uses a lot of the same parts of the melody. And it's a fun song. I'm a big fan. All right, so you save Tana, and Tana is very grateful that you've rescued her. She escorts you back to Frelia, where you meet with the king of Frelia, whose name is Hayden. Hayden gives Erica the tragic news that that her father has died in the fall of Rene Castle. However, there is some good news. Ephraim, as far as they're all aware, is alive. He's around, and he's been hounding the Empire. He's been, trying to strike blows at them here and there to make to try to annoy them, basically try to gain a little bit of headway. So as far as everybody knows, Ephraim is alive and fighting. And Erica decides that she is going to go and try to bring him reinforcements to help him out. And Hayden says, "No, absolutely not. You'll die. You're risking your life. Please just stay back and don't do this." Erica completely refuses. She says, "There's no way you're gonna talk me out of this." And so Hayden acquiesces and gives Erica a few of his most loyal retainers to take along with her. Gilliam from before joins the group for that purpose, as well as Mulder and Vanessa, who we'll be talking about next chapter. He also gives Erica a convoy, which I barely even registered when I read the dialogue. But then I quickly was like, oh shit, yeah, I should make a note about this. This is the first game to introduce something that would become a series staple in basically every single game after this, more or less. There's a couple of exceptions. But the idea of the Lord being your on-map convoy access. Think about how weird that is, right? Think about if you've only played the modern games, or if you've played predominantly the modern games. Prior to this game, there was always some sort of gimmick with the convoy, right? Merlinus in the past two games. There were the convoy shops in FE5, the castle in FE4. I don't remember. I don't know what they do in FE3. I barely played FE3. FE2 has some weird bullshit. I don't even remember what FE2 does. And then FE1 had like, again, shops similarly to Thracia. They have like buildings on the maps that you could go to access your convoy in the middle of a map. This is the first game. Maybe FE3 does. Again, I don't know. So if FE3 allows you to access the convoy in the middle of a map with your lord, with Marth, then let me know. But as far as I'm aware, FE8 is the first game to introduce this concept. And even if it isn't, it's the first one to actually utilize it in a very, very long time. And now, more or less, it's in every game. Like FE12, I'm pretty sure does it. FE13, 14, 15, maybe, yeah, I think 15. 16 for sure, and 17. They all have this system where the Lord is the one that has access to the convoy. Anybody standing next to the Lord can access the convoy, which is just like, it's hard to argue that this isn't the better solution, right? Like the convenience of this system is hard to match. However, I will say I do really like Merlinus. I really like the way that the previous two games handled Merlinus. FE7 in particular was like my favorite way that the convoy system has ever been handled in the series, because not only did Merlinus serve a function as like an on-map like side objective, like you can optionally deploy Merlinus and make guarding him a side objective for some of your slower units or units who you don't think are going to be as active on the front lines. It's a good job for Oswin, or if you want to bench Marcus but you still want to have him be useful for a little while. Or whatever units you're benching, it can be really helpful, or it can be really fun rather, to have that be a mission for some of your units. And then on top of that, once you got like a certain point into the game, Merlinus promotes and becomes a wagon like he does in FE7 in FE6. However, in FE6, he barely ever leveled up, and by the end of the game, he was just like he was like a free distraction, but most of the time, he just died in one hit anyway, so like he wasn't like that good at it for the most part, unless you needed like a one-time get out of jail free card. In FE7, Merlinus was like legitimately a dodge tank. You could sit him on a void terrain, and like a bunch of enemies would go after him, and he would just like dodge tank for days and days, and then even if you did get unlucky and he died, just like in FE6, he would just come back next chapter. So you really didn't have anything to worry about with him. I really enjoyed Merlinus in FE7. I don't know if I talked about that enough when we were actually playing FE7 and I was talking about it for the podcast, but man, I really do think that to this day that is my favorite way that the convoy has ever been utilized. I do wish that Merlinus in that game was annoying because if he died on a map, then you had to throw away all the items that you got, which wasn't the case for FE6 Merlinus. If you deployed him and he died, or if you chose not to deploy him, you can still send items to the convoy. You just couldn't pull them out of the convoy in the middle of the map. Whereas in FE7, if Merlinus is not deployed, or if he's killed for that particular map, then you just have to toss all the extra items you get, which is annoying. So I'm not a big fan of that, but otherwise I think Merlinus in FE7 is excellent. And I also like Merlinus in FE6. I don't think he's as good, but I think he's still pretty fun. But in this game, you just access it with Erica or Ephraim if you choose Ephraim route later, which is less fun, but I'm not a stick in the mud. I respect it. I understand. It's not the end of the world. It's convenient. It's nice to have. It makes sense. I just think it's a little bit less fun for me, but that's just me. Maybe you feel differently. Let me know how you feel. There is something before Erica leaves, they're stay the night or whatever. And there's a conversation here between Erica and Tana that I think is pretty interesting. They really establish multiple times, but especially in this conversation, that it's very confusing that Vigard would do such a thing. Nobody has any idea why they would do this. Vigard is reported to be a very pleasant man, doesn't like violence, and then this is the first time we find out about Leon. Leon was mentioned by Erica earlier, but this is the first time where it's referenced that he is the Prince of Grotto, and that Erica was his friend. So everyone's just really confused. I really like the mystery aspect of this game. They do such a good job establishing all these questions, and the answers to them are satisfying, and you keep playing in the hopes of finding out more about what's going on. I did unfavorably compare FE4 to this game in that it was unfavorable for FE4, and I still stand by that. But I think in retrospect, I think maybe that was a little bit harsh because I don't think it's the FE4. I think FE4 was particularly bad at its mystery element compared to this game, especially. But this game is also just really good, so it was maybe a little bit of an unfair comparison at the time. But that's neither here nor there. I still think that most other games handle it better than FE4 did, but FE8 was maybe a particularly brutal example to put it up against. Okay, and that's the end of the chapter. So next up we have Chapter 2, which is called The Protected. This is the first time where we get access to the world map. We can't actually do very much with it yet. We can just kind of move around to a couple of the places that we've been before. I think Border Mulan, Castle Frelia, and then now the new chapter that is the new chapter that's opened up for us here. And we can't all we can do is on the world map we can access the convoy and manager items and stuff like that. Later on we're going to be able to do skirmish battles here and visit shops and stuff on the overworld, again similar to Awakening. However, I think they just kind of want us to get introduced to the concept, get our feet wet a little bit, feel comfortable navigating it before they start doing shit with it later on. Again, there's nothing we can really do except move on to the next chapter. So that's what we do. Chapter 2, The Protected. As Erica and the company are progressing further south in their endeavor to get to Ephraim to help them out, they come across some bandits who are attacking local villages. They, a couple of them are like, maybe we should stop or go around. We don't want to avoid, or we want to avoid any unnecessary entanglements on our way to go help your brother. However, everyone's mostly in agreement that they should still go and help, because we don't want to just leave these people to die, essentially. One of the bandits attacks the local village, or one of the villages on the map. It's impossible to save. It just gets attacked during a cutscene. And 2 green units pop out, whose names are Ross and Garcia. And we're going to be talking about them once we recruit them. However, before then, we need to get to them. Erica can recruit Ross, who can in turn recruit Garcia. The problem is that they're on the other side of a mountain. So what do? Well, we have our new handy-dandy Pegasus Knight, who gives us a little tutorial about rescue dropping. She basically says, I can get across the mountains and pick the boy up and bring him over. The boy referencing Ross. I can bring him over. So Mulder can heal him. Because Mulder's a healer, priest. So that's what we decided to do. And that's how the chapter opens up. If you don't rescue Ross basically immediately, I think you can rescue him on turn 1. If you don't do that, then he dies like almost immediately. You have to get like really, really lucky for him to avoid just getting killed. And if he does die, then you won't be able to recruit Garcia either. So you definitely want to make that your top priority. But I like that the game makes it optional. You know, you don't have to go rescue Ross. You can, if you want to, just ignore him and let him and possibly Garcia die, and just move on to do other shit instead. You're probably not going to do that, but the fact that it doesn't force you to engage with the tutorial is really nice, and I'm a big fan of that. So let's talk about the new units that we get on this map. This is more like a real map. There's like actual things to do here. There's like choke points and terrain. There's a shop. There's villages. It's like there's like side objectives. You know, there's like real stuff going on. So I think you could argue that this is like the first like proper map in the game. And we get 2 new units on it. We get we get 4, I guess, but right off the bat we get a couple. Vanessa is this game's early joining Pegasus Knight, and she is very, 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 very good. She is considered by many to be the second best unit in the game, only below Seth. Which I think is pretty fair. You know, playing casually, maybe, you know, you could argue a couple others above her, but I think for the most part everyone's in agreement that Vanessa is like, at the very least, top 3, probably top 2. She's pretty, I mean, you know, she's a Pegasus Knight, right? Like, you guys know the drill at this point. Starts off a little weak, you know, doesn't hit for a lot of damage, but she's pretty fast, so she can double a lot of guys, especially if she's not getting weighed down. She can be a little bit on the frailer side. However, if she, because of her high mobility, and the ability to fly over terrain like mountains and such, she can usually get out of danger if she needs to, which is handy. Of course, as a Pegasus Knight, she does not benefit from any defensive terrain either. So she cannot, like, if she's on a mountain, she's not going to get the bonuses from being on a mountain at all. Which makes sense. It would be pretty broken if she did. One of the reasons that people consider her so strong is because it's very easy to feed her experience early on. There's not a lot of competition for that early experience. It's really just Franz, maybe like Archer if you really want to use Archer. But if you're just playing, you know, the game pretty casually, you know, it's really not like there aren't a lot of units that you're going to be splitting that experience with her with. So it's pretty easy to get her to level up, and you get a Elysian Whip pretty early on, so it's very easy to promote her before the route split, and from there she snowballs pretty effectively. In terms of her promotion options, she has 2, as I mentioned. One of them is Falcon Knight, which functions exactly the same as it does in the other games, the other GBA games, I should say. And then Wyvern Knight, which is the better option. Wyvern Knight is she hops on a wyvern, again, like an anatomically correct wyvern rather than a dragon, essentially. And she is... she gains, the biggest thing about the Wyvern Knight promotion, right, is that she gains 3 con on promoting from Pegasus Knight to Wyvern Knight, which is huge. That is enormous. And for Wyvern Knight, I think she might even get the same amount of speed. But even if she didn't, even if Falcon Knight gave her a little bit of speed and Wyvern Knight didn't, Wyvern giving her plus 3 con is effectively giving her plus 3 speed, because if she's using anything heavier than a slim lance, she's gonna be getting weighed down, she's gonna be losing attack speed, so that extra con under most circumstances is going to be an additional 3 attack speed, which is enormous. You know, that's the difference between doubling and not doubling a huge chunk of enemies in this game, especially since she's already pretty fast, and a lot of enemies in this game are quite slow. So that can be the difference between, you know, doubling the entire rest of the game versus not. So that's pretty good. So what does Falcon Knight have to offer in comparison to that? Well, swords. What would be, like, so here's the thing. Swords are bad in this game. I mean, they're not, like, terrible, but this game is so easy that it's very similar to FE7 in the sense that a lot of your best units are going to be throwing javelins and hand axes, and killing enemies on enemy phase. If this was FE6, where enemies were stronger, there was a lot less enemy phase tanking going around, then being able to promote to Falcon Knight and get swords might actually have a little bit of a niche, because they're a little bit more effective on player phase. It's better to have weapon triangle control in a game where enemies can actually do substantial damage to you, so an extra couple of points of damage and avoid might actually make a substantial difference. In this game, it really doesn't. You can just handle almost all of the enemies, including axe wielding enemies, with javelins, and you're fine. So I don't know if they thought that swords were like a bigger deal in this game than they actually are, but it's not worth it to go Falcon Knight under any circumstances. Of course, I like Falcon Knight more. I'm not going to be using Vanessa this playthrough, but I'll tip my hand a little bit and say that I will be using the other unpromoted Pegasus Knight that you get in this game, and I'm going to be making her a Falcon Knight because I just think Falcon Knight looks cooler. Fight me. But, it's definitely the worst of the two options, and I'm probably going to suffer for it. So thanks, FE8, for making me not want to use my favorite class. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Anyway, I like the class. Pegasus Knight is my favorite class. I don't know if I've ever hard committed to that, because I think there are a few contenders for that role. I really like Armor Knights. I really like Bow Knights. I think Heroes and Mercenaries are really cool. But I'm a big fan of Pegasus Knights. I think I'm ready to lock in Pegasus Knight as my favorite class. And it's actually I'm considering doing. I don't know if I'm actually going to do this, but I'm considering doing a standalone episode to talk about how Pegasus Knight and Falcon Knight have changed over the years, and how, in my opinion, they don't really have a good sense of class identity. It feels like they're very all over the place in what they want the class to be and what they want it to be used for. And in some games, they just cut it out completely. Fucking Engage not having Falcon Knights is like the biggest kick in the balls that they could do. Specifically me adding insult onto injury as someone who already doesn't like Engage very much. They're like, yeah, fuck you. You don't even get to use your favorite class in this game. Once you promote, I guess you can just keep Chloe unpromoted the entire game, but that's about it. Okay, and then the other character we get right at the start of this chapter is Mulder. Mulder is actually very interesting. Mulder's a very fun one for me, because I think that you can get a sense of what kind of player you're like, what kind of player whatever particular Fire Emblem player is, based on where they put Mulder in a tier list, right? Because if you're talking about fast, efficient play, Mulder is actually one of the highest characters in the entire game, because he is by far, not even close, the easiest character in the game to access warp. Because for some reason, I don't really know why they did this, I'm not complaining, but for some reason, they had him join in Chapter 2 with C rank staves, as opposed to most early game healers who have D rank, and can still usually get to warp without a problem. I mean, even Saul from FE6 can get to warp no problem, despite FE6 warp coming earlier and also Saul joining later. So I don't really know what they were thinking with that. But yeah, Mulder is extremely good at warping. He's like your best, most accessible warper. There's a few other characters that can do it as well. Archer comes to mind as being a character that a lot of people use. And what's his face? Sala also, if you're playing Erica route, Sala is pretty good at it. And, a couple others here and there. But it's definitely like Mulder's the premier warper for FE8. And obviously, like, that's pretty significant. Even if you're not warp skipping or trying to play quickly, warp is actually very, very useful in this game. There's a couple chapters where it really, really saves you a lot of hassle. So I am going to be using warp in a couple chapters in this game. I'm not going to be warp skipping. As a reminder, I am not warp skipping maps. The actual definition of warp skipping might be a little bit up in the air. I'll let you guys know how I utilize warp, and you can let me know if you think I'm a failure and a fraud by replying at I'm a Melee Kirby on Twitter and Blue Sky, or emailing turnwellpodcast@gmail.com. Make sure you make the subject line you're a failure and a fraud, and I'll be sure to read that aloud in the next episode. I mean, we're not going to get warp for a while, so this isn't going to be relevant for quite a long time. So, obviously Molder is very good if you're warping a lot, or if you are trying to play it fast and efficiently. If you're not, I still think he's good. I mean, obviously, like, early game healer utility is good, and warp comes in handy a lot in this game, even if you're not trying to play particularly quickly. So I definitely don't think he's a bad unit. In fact, I still think he's pretty high tier. Maybe like B tier. But just for the casual player, I definitely don't think that he's like as useful, and I think that you can definitely, like, if you're watching someone, he's like, yeah, we're gonna be doing a tier list, we're gonna be assuming, like, somewhat efficient, or like casual playthroughs, and they put Molder in like A tier. I don't know if that's necessarily if that's representative of how a lot of people tend to use Molder. It's not just because, like, warping is less important, but also because there are a lot of characters that you're probably going to get, like if you're using Archer, or using even characters like Lute, or Sala, you're much more likely to get those characters to warp, and with higher magic stats than Molder is likely to have at that point, they're probably going to be better at using warp than he is. So I definitely think that Molder is a good unit. But I think that a lot of people tend to conflate him with, like, one of the better units in the game, even in casual play. I've noticed that a lot, and I don't strictly agree. I think that he's good, but not like anything to super write home about. In terms of his promotion options, Molder is, he has the choice between Bishop and Sage. And Bishop is considered the better option for him because it gets him to warp faster. It's the long and short of it. In fact, one of the reason that he can get to warp so quickly is because he can go Bishop. If he goes Sage, then he's not going to be able to get to warp as reliably, as quickly. He can probably still do it, but it would take longer. However, consider that Sage looks really fucking cool. And like old man, like mustache, like Teddy Roosevelt, Molder in like the Sage outfit, like calling down lightning bolts and shit is like really cool. So I don't know if I'm going to use Molder this playthrough. It kind of depends on how he levels up, I think. But I definitely don't mind bringing him along for the ride for a while. And if I do, there's a good chance I'll promote him to Sage. I just think that that's fun. I like using Sages in this game. GBA Sages are just so cool. I think they're some of the coolest classes aesthetically in the entire GBA era of games. Okay, so yeah, the first mission is to get Ross over to the other side of the mountains where Erica can recruit him. Shortly after that, you can recruit Garcia by ferrying him across the mountains as well, and talking to him with Ross. So I'm just going to talk about both of them right now as well. I might as well. We'll start with Garcia because he's definitely like the easier of the two to talk about. Garcia is a fighter, and he's definitely a lot better than the early game fighters in previous games. I would say he's actually the best one between all three games, all three GBA games, which is really sad if you think about it. It just goes to show how bad Wade and Lot are. And Dorcas and Bartray also. I think he's better than all of them. But he's still not great. Garcia can promote. I mean, well, so I shouldn't get ahead of myself. He's like pretty slow. And does like a good amount of damage. He's actually very good for setting up kills for your other units, along with Gilliam, because neither of them double very reliably, but they do a pretty substantial amount of damage, which can allow, weaker characters to come in and get the kill, like Vanessa or Franz or Erica if you're training any of them, or his own son, who we'll talk about in a moment. When it comes time to... Again, I keep wanting to jump right into the promotion. I should say that even in a game with enemies as weak as FE8, he ends up being so slow that it can be pretty difficult for him to consistently double enemies. So it's definitely a little bit more difficult to use him in the long term than a lot of your other early joining units. I'm going to try to use him. I'm going to be letting you guys know who I'm planning on using over the course of the game. And I have a few of my guys locked in. But Garcia is one that I'm up in the air about. I want to see how he levels. I have a few different options in mind for my primary axe user. Because in this game, the legendary weapons, there's one of each different weapon type. So there's like incentive to actually use like a diverse team, like one that specializes in each of the weapon types, especially since in this game, unlike FE6, this game is similar to FE7 in that you can only get one S rank. So characters like Seth cannot use like multiple legendary weapons. So as for my primary axe user, I think this is the first character actually, where I'm like I'm considering using them for the whole game. I'm a little bit up in the air though. I could see myself going a couple different ways. I want to try to use Garcia, but I'm also considering using like Garrick rather. I'm considering using Dusel. I'm considering using a couple others. So I definitely don't have that super set in stone. I think all the other ones, right? Because I know who I'm using for. I know who I'm using for bows. I know who I'm using for lances. I know who I'm using for dark anima and light magic. And I know, so the only ones I'm still up in the air on are the sword Adhulma, the axe Garm, and the staff Latona. Those are the only three where like I haven't fully decided yet. So I could use like Mulder or Natasha for the staff. I could use like there's a whole bunch of different sword units I could use for Adhulma. And then Garm, I could go a couple different ways, but I'm leaning towards Garcia right now. But I could potentially mix it up later if I really wanted to. Okay, now we can talk about promotion. So Garcia's promotion options are Warrior, as is the normal like FE6 and FE7 promotion of Fighter was always Warrior, and Hero. Now the problem with Warrior as a promotion option for Garcia is that they seem to have forgotten to give Warriors promotion bonuses in this game. I don't know what it is, but they just decided that you were going to get absolutely no sauce on level ups, which is in contrast to FE6. I think FE6 was better about it. FE7 might have been also bad, but like I remember one of the GBA games actually had like really good promotion bonuses for warriors. I think it was FE6. So like using Lot or Wade made promoting and getting them to promotion made it a lot easier to use them more consistently. And they just didn't do that in FE8 for some reason. Like warriors just get absolutely no fucking stats on promotion. So yeah, Hero is the way to go with Garcia. And it's also, in this case, one of the rare instances of my preferred class being the better option. So if I am using Garcia, I'm definitely going to end up making him into a hero. That's my plan anyway. All right, now let's talk about Ross. Ross is a very interesting unit, because Ross is one of the 3 trainee units in this game. That's sort of how they that's the fan terminology, I think. I don't think they're ever referred to as trainees in the game. But there are 3 characters in this game, Ross, and then later we get Amelia, and then Ewan, who are all in classes like tier 0 classes essentially. They are weak classes that later, once they get 10 levels, or 9 levels, I guess, they get to level 10, promote into the base classes. In Ross's case, he is a journeyman. That is his unique class name. And when he gets to level 10, he can promote into either fighter, like his dad, or pirate. Now, here's the thing about Ross. Ross is definitely the best of the 3, but that's not saying much, because he's still, on the weaker end, and training him isn't, like, super hard. There's a lot of opportunities to give him kills and experience and stuff. So it's definitely not a pain or a slog to use him. You don't even have to slow down very much to utilize him, I don't think. You can feed him kills. He has a hatchet that I don't think is unique to him, but I think like he's one of the few characters that we have right now that can use it. It's pretty accurate. It strikes at 1-2 range, so they did do him the courtesy of giving him a weapon that makes it pretty easy to train him, which they didn't do for either of the other 2 for some reason. Maybe because at that point you have access to the Tower of Volney, so maybe they thought that was good enough. I don't know. But for Ross, they decided, yeah, we'll give him a hatchet so that he can accurately chip people at 1-2 range. And get experience that way. And he levels up very quickly. He can get to level 10 pretty reliably within a few chapters. And then once he does, and he can promote between fighter and pirate, the real issues with the class start to show. Because in a game where the class choices are as unbalanced as FE8, it feels like it undermines the whole point of the trainees. If the trainees are supposed to be characters that you can shape and mold in different directions, and that like there are multiple ways you can go with them and have them do different things depending on what you want in your playthrough, that's great. That's such a fun, cool concept. The issue is that some of these options feel like you are actively shooting yourself in the foot, which is a real shame. I think Ross gets it. On the one hand, I think he gets it better than the others, but I also think he gets it worse because I think there's like, so here's the thing: fighter into warrior makes sense for him narratively. That's what I did on my first playthrough. I used Ross and I made him into a fighter followed by a warrior. And that is like, that's shit. That's so bad for him. Both Hero and Berserker offer him way better either combat or utility or both. Berserker is a class that you don't get a lot of in this game. You only get one other Berserker option. He's a pre-promoted Berserker. And like they have mountain walking, they have water walking, they have extra critical. So it feels like Berserker's such a fun class, and to say like, no, I'm gonna go into warrior instead, it just feels like I'm actively kneecapping myself. And then if you do decide to go fighter, which I really don't think like I think people overstate the importance of him being able to walk on water in chapter 7. But like I do think that's a fun piece of utility that he brings to the table. But if you're willing to pass that up, which isn't that big of a deal, then hero versus warrior, which is the same option that is the same choice that his dad has to make. Warrior is just so much worse than the alternative, right? Because again, they just did not give him any fucking stats on promotion, which is it's just so crazy to me. Like if the whole concept is that like, oh yeah, you could take Gross and push him in whatever direction you want, if you choose to pursue the option of him like becoming more like his father and following in his father's footsteps, it's ass. It's so bad. He gets no benefit from that other than the narrative satisfaction of having him in the same class as his dad, which is pretty cool. I'll admit, I do like that. But it's just it's mechanically, it feels like such a handicap compared to what the other classes offer you, especially Berserker. Berserker is like so much fun, and I don't like using Berserker Ross because it feels like the obvious choice, but it's the obvious choice for a reason. It's the best of the three by a lot. So I just I don't know. Ross is a character that I've used to really, really enjoy using, but over time, as I become more familiar with the game, it feels less and less interesting to me because it feels like I either have the choice to make him a berserker every single time or just like screw myself over. I do like Hero a lot. My Hero is my personal favorite out of his 3 final class options. So from that perspective, sometimes I can go, I can use Ross and decide to make him a hero. I don't know that I've ever done that actually, because it has been a while since I played this game, but I'm not sure. I don't remember if I've ever made Ross into a hero. Yeah, okay. And I mean, like the ultimate thing with Ross is that he has a lot of extra levels to grow, but his growth rates aren't very good. In fact, they're actually below average. So by the time he promotes and promotes a second time, he's probably not going to be much stronger than any of the other units that you're using, which kind of defeats the point of having a trainee in the first place. So I enjoy using Ross from time to time, but he's definitely not one of my favorite characters to use like he used to be. He's not anymore. He used to be, but he's not anymore. Okay. I feel like I know the episode's going pretty long. We're already for my recording time. We're at about 2 hours, which is I'm getting pretty tired here. So I'm gonna try to wrap up this chapter pretty quickly. And the other notes that I have on it. So there's a few villages that you can visit here, and the dialogue here is pretty interesting. One of them has a character that we're gonna meet later on, whose name is Selena. She shows up in this chapter for the first time, and she sort of Erica has unique dialogue here. Selena's there no matter what, but if you visit with Erica, then there's unique dialogue here, where she basically says like, I'm a grotto soldier, but I don't want to see common people get caught up in this. I have to obey my orders, which are telling me to return to the castle. So I can't like stay and protect these people, but I'll pay you to do it for me, essentially. So the idea being introduced here is that maybe not everybody in Grotto is like horrible people. Maybe some of them want to look out for the common folk, and don't intend on just leaving Renee to its fate. Selena's story in particular doesn't like land very well with a lot of people. I'm curious to see how my opinion on that develops over the course of the game. But I think this is a pretty good introduction to like the concept of like, maybe there's some characters in Grotto that aren't half bad and just, are sort of victims of circumstance themselves. But we'll see where that goes. The only other thing I wanted to make note of in this chapter is... Actually, there's a couple things. There's another village, one of the other villages that you can visit right at the start. It gives you an elixir, which is pretty good. That's a pretty good item to get early on. But she says, the villager in this village says something to the effect of, a man dressed like a mercenary came to my rescue and saved me. And he was so dashing, and he gave me this. You should use it. And... I don't know who the fuck this is. It could be Joshua. My best guess is Joshua. I think that makes the most sense. But I also, like, it could be Garrick. It could be a couple other people. It could be someone from Grotto, even, because, Grotto is occupying the territory right now. But I'm pretty sure it's Joshua. Joshua is sort of like the womanizer, lady killer character in this game. So I think that's the most likely explanation. But I do find it funny that you just never get a proper explanation for him. Oh, wait! I remember who I want. It's not Joshua. But you might think it was based on the context. But I remember who I want to use at Hulma, and that's going to be pretty fun. So I'm excited about that. So yeah, I mostly have my team settled on. Okay. Yeah, that's just about it. You make your way down. The only real difficulty here is you might actually like kill the bandits too quickly before you can get the village in the bottom left, which is a pure water. It is possible for the bandits to attack that village. You have to be moving pretty slowly. But it is possible. The bandits will actually prioritize attacking your characters over destroying villages. At least in this chapter. I don't know if that's true in every chapter, but it is here. So you don't have to worry. Like, as long as you get some characters far enough down to be in range of the bandits to attack, then you'll be fine. They won't go after the village. However, you still need to get Vanessa over to that village after rescuing Ross and Garcia, which can be a little bit tricky. But it's like before you actually like kill all the bandits. But you're probably fine. It's probably not going to end up being an issue. And even if it is, like, a pure water is not like the end of the world to miss. It's like fine. That's the end of the chapter. In terms of story, the only thing that really happens after this map is that Garcia, thanks you for saving his son. Or if Ross dies, then Garcia, basically tells you to fuck off, I think. Garcia used to be a member of Renee's military, and Seth recognizes him, and asks him to join up with the army once again. Garcia essentially says no because he wants to make sure that he's spending enough time with his son. He spent so much time dedicated to his military service that he didn't spend like any time at all with his wife and child, and he doesn't want to make that same mistake again. So he says no, essentially, but Ross decides to step in and say, hey, you shouldn't give up being in the military because it's obviously something that you deeply care about. You want to protect your homeland. And I'll go with these guys even if you don't. So you better join. Better come along and help me out. And so that snaps Garcia out of it, and Garcia decides to join you, which is pretty cute. I think it's a fun little recruitment interaction there. Okay. And I think technically this is still chapter 2. There's a scene where Seth. And maybe it's just Erica by herself, actually. Erica's thinking about her past interactions with Ephraim. And specifically when, I think Erica asked Ephraim to teach her how to fight a little bit, because she doesn't want to be a burden on Ephraim. She and Ephraim have a really cute dynamic here that I enjoy. There have been previous games with more than one protagonist. Obviously, Gaiden, being the premier example, another thing that FE8 borrowed from Gaiden. You could argue FE4 has two different protagonists, even if they aren't protagonists at the same time. But FE8 is the first one where we get a lot of interaction between the two different protagonists, and I think that I just think that's great. You know, I like both Erica and Ephraim a lot, and I think the relationship they have with each other is like really nice. You know, it's really pleasant, and they care about each other and look out for each other a lot as siblings, and that's a very fun. They're twins, by the way. I mentioned that they were siblings, I think, but they're identical twins. I think, I don't know if they were literally identical twins, but they look very similar. Can you be identical twins if you're different genders? I don't really know how that works, but they look extremely alike. Yeah, I wanted to call attention to that scene because it's pretty nice. It's also our first time seeing Ephraim properly, so that's a pretty good reason to bring specific attention to it. I think is that this is the first time we're really getting to see anything about Ephraim other than just hearing other people talk about him. Okay, and then the end of the chapter ends on kind of a bleak note, maybe not a bleak note, but like a urgent note, because Erica's bracelet has been stolen by a local thug. You know, a guy just walks by, bumps into Erica by accident, and then the next thing that she knows, her bracelet's gone. And she's like, well, you know, it's just a bracelet, it's not a big deal. But Seth is very, very vested in getting, or very, very invested in getting that bracelet back. So he says, no, we gotta go after that guy who stole the bracelet, like, immediately. And that's how the chapter ends. Next up, we have chapter 3, which is called The Bandits of Borgo. That's basically how the chapter begins. They're going after this guy who stole Erica's bracelet. Before you progress to the next chapter, though, you can investigate the space on the world map that you start on. And there was an armory in that map. It was our first armory that we had access to. We could buy like iron weapons and things like that. And you can access that armory on the world map, even though the chapter is over now. So you don't have to worry about picking up weapons while you're actually in maps. That was something that happened a lot in previous games, is that FE6 and FE7 in particular, because there was no way to like if you forgot to buy or were unable to buy items in a particular chapter, then it might be a while before you have another opportunity. So it was possible to run low on basic weapons. That happened to me when I was playing FE7 a couple times. But that was pretty fun in its own way. You know, getting to armories and making that a priority could be like a fun little side objective. But in this game, you don't really have to worry about it, which I do appreciate the convenience of. So yeah, I do like that. I don't know if every single armory is the same as its on-map equivalent. I think this one is, but I'm not sure if they all are. Someone confirm that for me if you know off the top of your head. Either way, I could probably just like look into it. So you can start the next map by moving on to the next tile, and we're basically told that bandits have been running amok this entire time. Grotto has invaded Renee and decimated the army, and now there's nobody to keep order among the citizenry, and as a result, bandits are just everywhere. It's pure chaos. Because the Grotto army isn't attempting to bring any kind of order to the population, despite the fact that, you know, if they don't, no one will. They don't really seem interested in actually, like... This is our first hint that they don't really seem interested in actually conquering Renee and, like, making it their territory. It seemed like it was just for the purposes of attacking and destroying Renee, which is weird. They don't really draw attention to that, but that is something that they bring up a couple times. Like, why is Grotto not doing anything? Even some of the Grotto soldiers that we meet are wondering that, but we'll get to that at the end of this chapter. The group is approached by a character named Nami, who says that her friend Colm is in danger, going after a local group of bandits, and the group decides that they want to take down those bandits as well, so they're going to go help Colm out. So they make it to the local bandit stronghold, and there's not a whole lot I want to say about this chapter in terms of, like, you know, it's like kind of interesting. You have to, like, it introduces like doors and chests. It introduces our first thief, who is Colm. You know, so there's a couple things going on, but for the most part, I kind of just want to talk about the characters that we get here. We start off with Nami. Nami joins our group as a combatant. She is able to. She's an archer, so she shoots with bows and arrows. This is kind of useful on this map because there's a lot of like enemies on the other side of walls that she can be good at taking out, or at least chipping. The problem is that like her stats are terrible and her growth rates aren't very good, and that archer is a really bad class in this game because enemies are so weak that not being able to fight under most circumstances on enemy phase is like pretty abysmal. There's a question of who's worse between Nami and Rebecca from FE7 because both of them are like really bad early game archers, and Will for that matter. I personally think that Nami is the worst out of all three of them because it's like pretty. Like, this game is so easy. At least Rebecca early on in Hector hard mode can be useful for like chip damage. But in this game, that's not even really like necessary for the most part. And she's also not really good at doing chip damage anyway because she just does so little damage. But yeah, I'm going to be using her. But I have a very specific reason for it. I didn't want to use her. I don't like using Nami very much. But I wanted to use her because I am also going to be using Colm. And I decided that this game was easy enough where I could fuck around and be a little silly. And I want to do something fun with Colm. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with Colm. I'm going to make Colm. Colm is our thief. We get him early on. You have to recruit him by talking to him with Nami, which you can do right away. And they actually have a support that builds instantly. They as soon as you recruit both of them, they can support each other. Colm is a thief, and as thieves in this game promote into either rogues or assassins. A rogue is a new class that this game introduces. And their main claim to fame is that they can open locks without using a lockpick. Which is kind of nice. It seems like good utility. The issue is that under most circumstances, it doesn't actually matter because you can buy keys, and even if you couldn't, most of the time you're just gonna have a lockpick anyway. As long as you're like somewhat good about managing your resources, it's very, very unlikely that you are actually gonna need the benefits of the rogue utility. Assassin isn't much better. I mean, Assassin isn't a very good class either. So it's really just like, if you want to use Colm actively, just kind of take your pick of whatever mediocre class you want to put him in. But here's the funny thing about Assassin, and this was true in FE7 as well. In both of these games, the Assassin class has a skill called Silencer, which is a percentage chance equal to half of your crit rate. That you will instantly kill an enemy. Now, there are a few circumstances where that chance is lower. It doesn't work at all against the final boss, and then other bosses, there's the chance is already, that's like, so it's half your crit rate normally, and then it is cut in half again for regular bosses essentially. So it's pretty low chance on bosses. It's not like a very good strategy or anything, but I thought it would be fun if I did like funny silencer, like a funny silencer build on Colm. Here's the issue: is that Colm's only support partner that gives him the maximum amount of crit that he can get is Nami. And maybe there was another one, but like Nami's the one, like out of the options that I had, Nami was the one that I was like, okay, I guess this is my best option. The support builds fast, and I haven't used Nami in a while, so like I'm not against doing it. But it's pretty funny that was like the only option that I had, or one of the only options. So yeah, I'm gonna be using both Colm and Nami. Colm is not my Adholma user. I have another one in mind. Colm is just gonna be like my guy. So there's 8 legendary weapons, and then Erica and Ephraim, and then you can bring in 2 additional characters to end game on top of those 10. I mean, you can use whoever you want. Obviously, you don't need to use all the legendary weapons, but I want to. So I'm choosing to make Colm one of like my 2 like characters that I bring in that doesn't have a legendary weapon, which is fine. You can do the funny silencer thing. It works. Does it work against Draco zombies? I wonder if it does. That would be really funny. Okay, I didn't really talk about Nami's promotion options. Her options are between Sniper and Ranger. Ranger functionally is very similar to Nomad Trooper. It even uses the same weapon types. It doesn't have 8 move in this game. In the previous games it did. In this game it only has 7. So, like, theoretically, it's not, like, as bad of a trade-off compared to, like, Nomad Trooper versus Sniper. The problem is that Sniper is just bad. It gets a skill called Sure Shot, which makes it so that you have a chance of, like, always landing, like, your next attack just bypasses the accuracy check. Sniper is already a very accurate class anyway, so I don't really understand what the purpose of that is, but it's like it's there, I guess, if you particularly care. I'm gonna be making Namie into a ranger. Ranger's still not like an amazing class. It has a mount which is nice, but swords are like not, as we've established, are not the best weapon type in this game. They're better than bows for sure, but you'd much rather have like axes or javelins, or lances, I guess. But it's better than sniper, so we'll take what we can get. I think it's gonna be a fun. I think it's gonna be a fun thing. It probably won't end up like accomplishing very much. There are gonna be a lot of times where I'm not actually like gonna proc silencer at all, and it's gonna be really lame. But I still think it's gonna be a fun time. I'm gonna try and see like how effective it is. Yeah, let's we'll see where that goes. Okay, and then as far as the rest of the map goes, it's pretty straightforward. It's good. It's good. This is a good map for training your weaker units. I will say that I think this map is a little bit on the dull side. I haven't really been commenting on the quality of any of these maps because it feels a little bit unfair. Like I'm not like they're clearly not meant to be like full good standalone maps. They're meant to be sort of like tutorials for some of the game's core mechanics, which is fine. I think other games have done it better, but between this chapter and the previous one, I think that they're like good enough to like qualify as real actual maps, unlike the first two, which basically just felt like like 2 or 3 turn romps and whatever the fuck. But this one in particular I thought was kind of boring. It can slow down to a crawl if you're not using Seth in particular, which is like, I mean, that's my fault, right? Like the game is expecting you to take advantage of Seth. But it's just like, there's just like a lot of like breaking walls. The boss is like really, really, really strong if you're not using Seth. A lot of your guys are just going to do like single digit damage to him, and he's not like, he doubles some of them. It's like pretty bad. It's not actually that hard, especially if you're using Seth. But even if you're not, like a well-trained Erica can probably do a decent amount to him, or like Franz if you've been putting a lot of experience into Franz. There's like a couple different options you have. It's not that big of a deal. So there's a lot of cutscene that takes place after this chapter. We get our first enemy POV, which I think is really cool for a couple reasons. First of all, like, normally, I don't remember when we typically get enemy POVs in previous games in the series. It's probably like around the same time that we get our first instance of like seeing things from an enemy perspective. Like I remember the fucking like round table Loptier cult meeting from FE5 in chapter 4. There's a couple other chapters like that across the series, where it takes us a little while to sort of like see things from the enemy perspective. But I think it works particularly well in this game because we still know so little about what's actually going on with Vigard and with the other Grotto people, right? Like we don't know what the hell is happening. And even when we do get this enemy POV, they still manage to make things feel mysterious by putting us in the perspective of characters from Grotto who also don't know what's going on. The 3 generals of Grotto, Dusel, Glenn, and Selena, are all here, and they're kind of like talking about, how they have misgivings about the current situation. They're not sure why Vigard hasn't like given them the order to start maintaining peace around Rene. And they're like, what's going on? He seems so different. Like, we don't know what's going on. Selena does kind of jump in to say, well, it doesn't really matter what we think because there are orders. We have to follow them. But obviously the other 2 are still very unsure about what to do. They get called in for an audience with Vigard, where they're hoping to learn a little bit via this audience. They do learn a couple things because Vigard just kind of casually drops that they don't have the strength to, quote, conquer the remaining nations alone. This is a prelude to him introducing 3 new generals to stand alongside the original 3. As I guess during the invasion of Rene, there were like 3 people that really stood head and shoulder above the rest of the soldiers. And so they've been promoted to general. All of them have a nickname named after a stone. I believe Dusel is obsidian, Glenn is sunstone, and Selena is fluorspar, if I'm not mistaken. And then these three new generals, one of whom we've actually met before. We have Reeve, the Blood Barrel, I think is what he's called. The Tiger Eye, Calic, who is a hero. And then we have actually met the last one before. His name is Volter. He is the guy who fought Seth at the beginning of this episode, and he is to be called Moonstone. Now, here's why I wanted you guys to make a little mental note of Volter saying that he was called Moonstone at the beginning of the game. Okay, there's a lot of okay, so it's very obvious that these three guys are evil, right? Like, they're the evil generals who are brought in to make sure that the good generals don't step out of line, to make sure that he that everybody that he has on the front lines or the higher ups are willing to do his bidding. But it's a little bit up in the air how in on it most of these guys are. Reeve, we find out later, is in on the whole thing. He knows everything about what's going on, and he's totally on board with it. Volter and Calic are a little bit more up in the air. But what's interesting about Volter is that even before he was promoted into being a general, he knew that he was Moonstone, right? He said, my name, I'm known as the Moonstone. And now some of you may be saying, well, he, if you know the story of FE8, he was previously in the Grotto Army. I don't remember if he was a general previously. I also don't remember if he was previously known as Moonstone. But even if both of those things were true, right? Why does he, the fact that he still considers himself Moonstone, I think there may be more going on here than we're being led to believe. I think that maybe Volter was already well aware that he was going to get his position back when he encountered Seth, which I think is, if that's true, I think that's a very interesting hint at sort of the dynamic of what's going on here, which I don't know if that's intentional. And again, you can make all sorts of reasons for it. I choose to read it that way because I think it's pretty interesting if that's the case. But it might not necessarily be. I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, no one is. So yeah, they're clearly, he doesn't even lead up to the idea that they're going to be invading the other nations. He just says that they're going to do that. And the others are just kind of have to roll with it. And yeah, that's where things end. I actually did skip over a cutscene that I wanted to bring attention to. After the Bosba Bandit chapter, Colm gives the bracelet back. Seth has to threaten him, but Colm does give the bracelet back, and Erica's why is this bracelet so important? And Seth is I can't tell you right now, but please just trust me that it's of the utmost importance that you keep it safe. And Erica says, that's good enough for me for right now. I trust you. I'm sure you'll tell me when the time comes for me to know. And that's good enough for her, which I think is I think it's nice. I think it shows the level of trust that she has in Seth. But yeah, that's the end of the chapter. That scene did come before the scene with the generals. I spoke about them a little bit out of order. That is my bad. Okay, yeah, that's everything that I wanted to cover up to this point. The next chapter, we're going to be introduced to some new concepts next chapter, which I'm excited to talk about. But yeah, that's it for now. In terms of the in the map gauntlet, we have chapter 2 and chapter 3 are, I think, the only ones that are really worthy of consideration right now, and I think that I got to give it to chapter 2. I think it's a nice diegetic way to tutorialize rescue dropping and the utility that flyers offer, more so than I think chapter 3 of was it chapter 3 of FE7, I think, did the same thing with Florina, being able to fly over the walls and fight at weapon triangle advantage against the mercenary who she can go fight. That it's a very similar idea. I think they're a little bit more heavy-handed about it in this chapter, but it's the same general concept, right? And I think it's really cool how the game teaches you these things without just beating you over the head with it, which is pretty fun. Yeah, I mean, it's not really anything to write home about. I've been trying to predict which chapter in the game is going to be my favorite by the end of the game, if it's going to be the same as when I started. I think that pretty consistently that has been the case. I think I was a little bit up in the air about what my favorite FE7 chapter was going in for the first time. I think that I had said it was Dragon's Gate, and it ended up not being Dragon's Gate by the end. So that one maybe my expectation was a little bit was dethroned a little bit. This game, I'm not 100% sure what my favorite map in the game is. I'm gonna have to try to remember. It's probably like some miscellaneous Ephraim route map. Off the top of my head, I kind of want to say it's Chapter 10. Ephraim route, which is the one where you recruit Cormag and Dusel on Ephraim route. I think that one's really good. So there's a good chance it's that one. I like chapter 18 with the Gorgons. It's annoying, but I remember finding it kind of fun to fight the Gorgon eggs. I like, it's probably one of those two, maybe a couple of other chapters here or there. I think I'm going to go ahead and lock in my prediction as chapter 10 of Ephraim Route, because I remember really, really liking that map. But there could be some others that I end up liking more. We'll have to see. We're going to be playing every map, obviously. So yeah, no worries there. We're going to be doing both Ephraim Route and Erica Route, obviously. Whichever one I continue from will depend on. It's probably going to be Ephraim Route. I kind of want it to be Ephraim Route, but it could be down to a couple different factors. Okay, yeah, that's all I had to say. So I think we can go ahead and move on to news. See if there's any news. Let me pull up Serenus Forest. I've been on Serenus Forest a lot recently, actually, for reasons that I'll get into. There are figures, 3 houses figures. I see Byleth. Is it Figma of Byleth female from 3 houses. And then there's also ones for Dorothea, Sylvain, and Hilda. There's a Edelgard figure. There's a new volume of the Engage manga. And that's about it. There's a few Engage things. Yeah, that's about it. I think did I talk about the Dimitri figure? I think I might have, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's really it as far as news goes. In terms of things that I've been doing, I haven't played like very many games, I don't think, since the last time I put out an episode. I'm gonna bring up my backlog just to check that, but I'm pretty sure it's been I played Trails Through Daybreak 2. Which came out a couple months ago, which is the reason why this episode took so long to get done. Or at least part of the reason. There's a lot of shit coming out now. The Eiyuden Chronicles DLC is out. I haven't even played that yet. The Suikoden remaster is out. I'm so excited. I'm gonna save talking about that more for when I do the episode, I guess, on Suikoden 3. That's going to be coming out, like, I haven't even started playing Suikoden 3 yet, so I have no idea when that's going to be coming out, but, I'll get around to that eventually. The main thing that I've been doing is I've actually been playing a lot of different Fire Emblem games. I have, I don't know how I let this happen, but I have, 5 Fire Emblem playthroughs going on at the same time. I think there's only 4. I started a 3 Houses playthrough that I didn't get very far in. I should probably keep going with that, although that might end up fizzling out. I'm not sure. I started my second playthrough of 3 Hopes, which is going to be going along the Blue Lions route. The whatever it's Azure Gleam, I think, is what it's called in that game. That hasn't gotten very far either, so I don't know. I'm definitely going to finish that at some point. I want to. I want to play all 3 routes of that game eventually, even if it takes me a little while. And then I did an Awakening draft. I'm still working on that, although I am getting pretty close to the end of that one. I'm on the Yenfei chapter in the fucking volcano, so that's relatively close to the end. I'm 2/3, I think. And that's been going okay. I don't like Awakening all that much from gameplay, or the story for that matter. I don't think it's a very good game. I like some of the characters, and I like the dialogue a fair bit. So I'm having a relatively good time, but some of the maps in that game, especially in the mid and late game, are just so bad. In case anyone's wondering, my team for that draft was pretty fun. I'm actually this is a team that I'm pretty excited about. So our free units for that draft were Robin, Crom, Frederick, Lissa, Olivia, Lucina, Morgan, and Inigo. Inigo just because he was the last one. Nobody fucking wanted to grab him, so we just threw him in the free category. And then the units that I picked were Tharja, Cynthia, Maribel, Gaius, Noir, Sayri, and Donal. Donal, I was last pick in the draft, so Donal was the one I got stuck with at the end, which is really funny because I love using Donal. I use Donal in like every playthrough of this game that I do, so I went out of my way to not pick Donal. I was like, no, I don't want to use Donal again. I want to mix it up. I want to use different characters, but I ended up getting stuck with Donal at the last minute anyway. So I had no choice. And I've been using him, and he's been great. I've been loving it, so I'm not complaining. But like, man, it's just really funny. I wanted to go out of my way to not use him so badly, but I did not. I did not commit to it, or I couldn't commit to it. And that's a fun draft. We did draft kids separately because it's very easy in that game, especially if you're playing. I'm playing on hard for that, but I know a couple people are playing on lunatic. But it's pretty easy in that game to just like do skirmishes and stuff to get characters married and get kids, even if you're not actively using both parents. So we did draft the kids separately, which is why I have like Cynthia and I think it's just Cynthia actually. I have Cynthia without. I didn't draft Sumiya, so someone else got Sumiya. Okay, yeah. Oh, and then yeah, I forgot the biggest one, the one I was saving for the end. I have been playing more Fire Emblem Engage. I started a second playthrough. I mean, I guess this was my third or fourth attempt to start a second playthrough, or maybe just my second. And I've been playing it, and I've made it pretty far. I'm towards the end. This is just a normal hard mode playthrough. I haven't. It's not like a draft or anything. I'm just using the characters that I want to use. I almost said the characters that I like, but that would be a little bit misleading since I don't like most of them very much. But yeah, and that's been going okay. I've been enjoying it more this playthrough than I did my first time through. But that's just not saying very much. So I don't know how much of consolation that is to the Engage fans out there. I apologize if you're a big fan of Engage. It's just not really my game. I really wanted to. The reason that I wanted to do this is because it occurred to me, if I get to this game for the podcast, many years from now at this rate, I get there for the podcast and I have like no idea how any of these fucking systems work, then it's not going to be a game that I do a good job of explaining on the podcast. So I wanted to do a second playthrough to like get a handle on how things work in the game that I didn't understand my first time around. And I think that I'm doing a better job of that now. I'm inheriting skills. I'm using the engrave system more actively. I've been actually engaging with the game mechanics more than I did my first time around. So that's fine. And it's been okay. Some of the maps have been fun. There have been a couple of maps that I've enjoyed. The Ike Paralogue was great. I really enjoyed the there was another one. It was one that I did recently too. Fucking what was it? It was one of the Emblem Paralogues. It might have been shit. What was it? I'm drawing a complete blank. It wasn't Corrin, was it? No, Corrin's was okay. Actually, no, Corrin's was fun. It's not the one I was thinking of, but Corrin's was pretty fun. I don't remember. I thought that chapter 11 is fun. There's a couple that I like, and most of the ones that I don't particularly care for, it's not because I think they're bad. I just think that they're kind of like boring or forgettable. But otherwise, they're like fine. There are a couple maps that I think are bad. I think there are like several of the paralogs are bad. Surprise, surprise! I don't like the one that's based on Thracia. This map's so fucking bad, guys. I hate the ballista in it so much. It really makes me. It like is such a beautifully accurate recreation of how much I fucking hate playing Thracia 776. It's so fucking annoying. But you cannot say that they haven't put a lot of love and care into making the game feel like an homage to previous titles. And yeah, that's been fine. I've been using some fun characters. Boucheron's been one of my MVPs. Not as much as like the enemies have started to outpace him, but early on he was really helpful for me. I'm still using him though. I'm committing to using him long term because of course I am. I've been using Panette. Panette's been a lot of fun. Everyone likes Panette. Everyone knows Panette is goated with the sauce. Rosado's been really fun. Chloe, you know, a lot of fun characters that I've been using. So, the gameplay is like I've been enjoying the gameplay more than I did my first playthrough. I haven't really been enjoying the story or the characters any more than I did my first playthrough. But you know, the gameplay's been somewhat fun. You know, it's still one of my least favorite games in the series, but it's a little bit more, a little bit better than I think I felt about it. We'll see if that holds true though, because as I get closer to the end of the game, I might end up feeling the same way that I did the first time I beat the game. So who knows? We'll see. Okay, that's about all that I had for you guys. As always, you can leave any comments or anything that you want to say to me at I'm a Melee Kirby on Twitter and Blue Sky, or email turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com, particularly if you want to answer the question of what was your first Fire Emblem game, and how did you get into the series. Please feel free to let me know, and I'll read your answers on the next episode. All right, I think that's it. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.